Welcome back to Pixel Project Radio, the video game discussions podcast where we do deep dives and analyze all of our favorite games and some of yours too. My name is Rick, I am your host as always, and today we're kicking off October with Silent Hill, Konami's grandfather of the psychological horror genre in video games. This is the start of the spooky month, as is done in so many podcasts and YouTube channels across this great world we live in. Thank goodness. And speaking of thanks, I want to thank the patrons because, as always, this episode is brought to you by them. So thank you, patrons. If you'd like to be like these fine folks, you can check us out at patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. We could talk about that towards the end. What we're going to talk about right now, at the beginning, in the now, is our guest, because we have a first-timer on the show, a podcaster that I actually found, maybe not the very first quote-unquote indie podcast that I found when I started, but certainly one of the folks. We've got Phil from Deleted Saves. Phil, thanks for joining me, man.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Thanks for having me on finally. I've been wanting to come on your show for some time, and finding the right game to do it is difficult to do sometimes with the great list of games that you have, and I think this is the perfect one.
Yeah, man, I'm glad that you agreed to come on. We had just a little peek behind the curtain. We had a game planned before this, but life situations happened and it didn't work out. I'm actually glad that we decided to do this one instead of the game that we were previously going to talk about, because Silent Hill has been a blind spot in my gaming history forever. The first time I played it was for this show, and I'm really excited to talk about it. I am pretty self-conscious when it comes to horror games. I don't feel like I am super well equipped to talk about them. I know what I like, and I like horror movies just fine, but I don't consider myself an expert here. So listeners, if you're a new listener, first of all, welcome. I hope you enjoy. But if you're looking for like the definitive take on Silent Hill, something that nobody has ever said before on this almost 2 decades old game, you might not find it here. At least not from me. Maybe from Phil, but certainly not from me. Enough talking from me. Let's talk about our personal histories. I kind of just gave mine, so I'd like to pass the mic to you, Phil. When did you first play this game?
Well, not long after I played through and completed Resident Evil 1, which was the reason I actually got a PlayStation to begin with. I wanted to play this strange zombie game that had just caught my attention recently. I was looking for more, and it wasn't there yet. We had a couple of wannabes, and then Resident Evil 2 came out, which remains one of my all-time favorite games. And quickly and, well, almost strangely, somewhat quietly, Silent Hill followed on the heels of Resident Evil 2 about a year later. It was talked about in the game's press, but the most unusual thing is it was not a Capcom game. It came from Konami, the people who, for most of my gaming life up to that point, had been arcade beat-em-up classics, and of course, the Castlevania series. This one caught my attention. I bought a copy, I brought it home, and I began to play it. And it was such a departure from Resident Evil in the case that you're basically playing an everyman who is not some kind of cop or trained soldier or even knows what end of a gun is the dangerous one. He's just a dude. In fact, I think he's a writer by profession. And the game is weird. And that's, I think, what really drew me to keep going forward and forward with this game, is to try and really understand what exactly was happening.
That's a common feeling for first-time players to have. This game is from an era of games that did this quite a lot, but it doesn't... when it was created, they didn't know that it was going to spawn this huge series, and some of the plot beats and lore reasons and so on and such forth are left intentionally vague and ambiguous to spark discussion or to create that eerie, dreamlike atmosphere that this series is so well known for. Something that you mentioned that I just wanted to get ahead of for listeners that might be wondering, you mentioned that our protagonist, Harry, is not, he doesn't know which end of the gun is more dangerous, which one, funny and true, but two, it reminded me that in my research, I found, I forget if it was the prequel, there's a prequel game to this, I forget if it was the novelization of this, that expands on this, saying that Harry always kept a gun in his on his person, like he was always armed, and that was something that was not added in this game. But I wanted to get ahead of that by saying, for today's discussion, we are primarily going to be talking just about this game. So any additions to the lore or storytelling or etc. that came after this first game, not on this episode, unless it's just in passing.
Absolutely. I mean, again, everyone loves extended lore. Jesus Christ, we get 9 Star Wars movies for a reason. But it's hard to really argue with someone saying, well, in retrospect, we added this because people wanted more. And all right, you got me. I can't argue with you. You wrote it. You made it part of the lore, so now you're trying to retroactively apply it to what I experienced in the game, and I disagree.
I do have a soft spot for not retcons, but lore add-ons, lore additions. I do. I liked them quite a bit whenever I was younger, but I also think that was just because they were more prevalent back then. It felt like more of an event as opposed to just getting like a tacked on DLC or, like you said, a complete reworking of a franchise by somebody like Disney.
You're right. I mean, lore additions were always fun. I mean, they can still be fun today. It's you find something you love, and you're just kind of getting more of the thing that you love. The problem is it's an interpretation by another creator, another artist, and where do we draw the line between they're just basically cashing a paycheck by adding stuff? Are they making the work now derivative, or are they genuinely adding to the experience? And unfortunately, I mean, I know, Rick, you're a musician, I'm a visual artist. We each in our own disciplines have to kind of decide for ourselves where that line is drawn. And so does the public. The viewer, the listener, the person taking the entertainment in has to decide for themselves what they feel is that line.
So speaking of lines, I'm going to draw one right here, and we're going to cross it into some precursory information about this game, and we're going to kick it off with a contribution from the community forum. If you're a new listener, the community forum is a Discord channel in which I ask you to tell me about the games that we're covering on the show, and I read your thoughts on here. You write them, I read them. That's the tagline. And we're going to start with Chris Copleen. Here's what Chris has to say. By the way, Chris, I edited this one just a little bit to make it a little more brief. Your thoughts are very appreciated, but I didn't take out anything super important. Here's what Chris has to say. One of the most important horror games ever made? Possibly. Silent Hill, when released, was quickly labeled as a Resident Evil clone. And that isn't without some justification, but the difference was the Silent Hill took some chances. Silent Hill was introducing concepts to a more mainstream audience, of pushing it forward, things that weren't prevalent outside of perhaps the more niche PC crowd. Combined with the protagonist just being a Joe everyman who attacks awkwardly and breathes heavily after running for a prolonged distance, Silent Hill starts to explore the idea of a more vulnerable atmosphere, much like Clock Tower, but doesn't completely leave the player defenseless like Resident Evil. It's a milestone of the genre, even if today it can't exactly capture what it was like to play it when it first came out. That notion of playing it and having that feeling of what it was like when it first came out, that's something that I'm going to save my thoughts for until we get to the visuals, because that's where I feel that dissonance the most. I don't know about you, Phil.
Yes, and that's the thing. And Chris, you're very right on this one, I will say. Again, as someone who was there in the moment playing it, outside of the PC realm, it was basically on top of the line hardware. It may not have been the most top of the line graphics. It was still 3D graphics. They were still struggling with the concept. Just 2 years earlier, we had Symphony of the Night came out and had blown away expectations by essentially 2D sprite work on the PlayStation. But also that year, we had something like Final Fantasy VII, which was 3D or 3D characters on 2D painted backgrounds. When we have games now like Silent Hill, where you're technically in a full 3D environment, they were a wonder to behold at the time. Graphics like this today, I mean, we've seen some retro graphics in, say, the Bloodborne remake or Crow Country, and they're considered kind of cute, little bits of nostalgia. But in a lot of cases, those 3D graphics have not aged well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'll save my thoughts for that for a minute. Silent Hill, you had mentioned that it came out around the time of something like Final Fantasy VII. This came out in 1999 in February, March, and July, depending on whether you were in the US, Japan, or Europe, respectively. This was developed by Team Silent and published by Konami. You can find the full credits on the wiki, the IMDb, or by beating the game yourself. But of note, we've got director and writer Keiichiro Toyama, who also worked on Snatcher and Gravity Rush, among others. Producer Gozo Kitao. Composer Akira Yamaoka, who also worked on Snatcher and Gradius, as well as Lollipop Chainsaw and some others. Lots to say about the sound design, too, when we get there. Team Silent was a group of Konami employees that sort of formed internally within the company, and they started working on this game in 1996. They wanted to create a game that would be successful in the United States, which sort of led to this Hollywood-like atmosphere. I think that this is really prevalent in specifically some of the late game scenes.
I would agree. Again, this is the concept of Japanese developers and Japanese culture trying to really sort of understand America as a concept. Not just America, the country. We've met some American citizens. We work with developers around the globe. But America, the concept, the idea, the presentation by Hollywood, which, as you and I know who live here, this is a great falsification. It's the great, sort of fluffing of the American ideal, and unfortunately this is what we ship around the world. I wouldn't expect a bunch of Japanese developers to not really understand America as a concept except through the medium of television and movies. So the concept of a Hollywoodification or a Hollywood ideal, yeah, that's an easy pitfall to fall in.
Absolutely. And speaking of television, I'm glad that you brought that up. Toyama and also Yamaoka, they were both really influenced by David Lynch and in particular the television show Twin Peaks. So if we think back to David Lynch, David Foster Wallace has an excellent essay on David Lynch, and he describes the Lynchian atmosphere as a blending, this is just paraphrasing by the way, I didn't write this quote down, the blending of the banal with the grotesque. So a classic example is like you open a regular refrigerator and next to something like a pot roast is a plate of like intestines and organs. Something really grotesque living alongside and in conjunction with the everyday, the banal. And this game, and indeed this series, does that extraordinarily well, I think. Maybe not as, how to describe it? Maybe not as, like, restrainedly creepy as you might find in some later works, but especially for an early horror game on the video game consoles, really one of the first psychological horror games that I can think of. I think they succeeded very, very well.
Yeah, absolutely. Silent Hill really does more. Well, it does the grotesque well, especially with its graphical limitations. As you said, it's more of the banal horror. The everyday man comes home from work, wife is preparing dinner. Here, honey, have a beer, gives him a beer. Here, honey, here's tonight's dinner. And what you expected was a pot roast may now be a squealing lamb. And you're like, oh, God, things have gone horribly wrong. And she's just standing there smiling. Myself also, I would be not hesitant, but I would be more remiss if I did not add that there is a certain amount of the creepier episodes of the X-Files would also, I think, have made bits and pieces of appearances. If there was, some sort of cross-pollination of ideas, even if by accident, I think that would be a part of it. The ones I usually go to, especially that do grotesque horror well, at least in my opinion, were always John Carpenter and David Cronenberg, or at least the early Cronenberg. Both men were good at setting up the grotesque out of the banal, out of daily life. They're truly bizarre, but also setting a level of tension that doesn't really abate. As we do in horror, the concept is, of course, to go tension release, tension release, tension release, tension release. And look, a lot of cases, those men just tension, 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 small release, tension, 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 until things result in whatever their denouement may be, whatever their ending goal is. And it can be wild in some cases what they come up with.
Yeah, that's really well observed. This entire game is really just a lot of tension and not as much of the release as you might expect with some other maybe more well-known products or more commercial products. I don't know how you'd like to say that, but and Silent Hill 2, for what it's worth, so far has been that as well. I haven't completed it at the time of recording, but I'm getting through it, having a good time. But this game is not only about the Lynchian idea of grotesque against the everyday. Fear of the unknown is also a big influence and idea that they were working with. At a certain point in development, Konami kind of started to lose faith in this project, and that's when Team Silent said, we have so much artistic wiggle room here that we can really make the kind of work that we would want to play and that we would want to see, that we believe in. And that's when they kind of hunkered down into this idea of the fear of the unknown, creating a sense of Joe Everyman, things like that. Speaking of fear of the unknown, I wanted to pepper in another community correspondence from Discord regular Poppy the Keaton. Here's what Keaton has to say. Silent Hill was terrifying when it came out. It was a glorious example of the terror of the unknown, and I don't just mean the low visibility. The crackle of the radio static letting you know you're about to be attacked, but not by what. The shifting condition of the town, the weird inhabitants, it all keeps the player off balance mentally, and I believe it was handled well. At the time, I do wish more had been explained, but maybe it's better than most things weren't. That would reduce the mystique a bit. Yes, that a lot of that ambiguity was intentional. We're going to talk about a lot of it as we go through the story today, and I might have to lean on Phil a little bit because I definitely had to scrub through the wiki to figure out a few of the things that I missed. And I imagine that a lot of first-time players will feel that way too.
Yeah, no problem. I will say that there is one thing they do well is, as with horror, sometimes the best horror is what they call personal horror. The thing that happens to you, what is happening to me. We all have a fear of pain, because we're living creatures. We have a fear of blood. But as you go up in the levels, it becomes existential dread of not what is happening to me, what may happen to someone I love, what may happen to a parent, a spouse, a child, a friend, a pet, none of whom are in a horror story ever safe, nor should they be. That's really, I think, what sort of drives our character and is done best in this, the ambiguity and the concept of personal horror.
Yeah, exactly so. That idea of, in the unknown, anything can happen. Anything is a possibility to you and to those around you, like you said. That's part of what makes it so scary. Being in the dark, it's the darkness itself isn't scary. It's what could possibly be within it that is the true terror. That's what we're scared of. I think this game does that really well. So, speaking of things done really well and some of the things that you and Keaton were touching on, we're going to go into the visual presentation, and I'm going to add another bit of correspondence from Nomad. Here's what Nomad has to say. Silent Hill will forever be one of my favorite games for a couple of reasons. First, the atmosphere it created and how it had the ability to fully immerse me in its world. For a PS1 game, it perfectly captured my imagination and made me genuinely fearful for what lay ahead. Who knew fog and the crackling of a handheld radio would give me chills? Secondly, my stepdad and I played through the game together when I was younger, and while some of the story beats were lost on us so long ago, I loved going through the town of Silent Hill with them, solving puzzles together, and wondering if he heard that noise or if it was just me. It's a really sweet memory. Nomad, thank you for sharing. Yes, let's talk a little bit about, so the fog has come up a couple of times. Let's talk about the visual presentation, and let's start with the fog. This is something that I say on this show all the time. Limitations can really exacerbate creativity, and I think that's what was happening here. The fog was used to limit the draw and render distance, and while that does have an artistic effect of creating this tension of, like we were saying, the fear of the unknown, what is out there, the possibilities are literally endless until we are 6 feet ahead. It was also very practical because it masked all the loading of the environment that needed to be done. This was early 3D technology, and the fifth gen has not aged the most gracefully in that respect. So this kind of masked all of that. It was a really creative solution. I'm really into it. I think, I don't love the visuals in this game, even as a whole, but that was clever. I think that was a really great artistic touch.
Absolutely. And like you said, it really was a problem of the time. When they were developing the game, to my understanding, as they were trying to build the city, that was so much the problem. And oftentimes what happened in games of this era was you would get so far in the draw distance and it would be black and there was just a lot of pop in. Things would build, they would pop in, they would pop in, they would pop in. And let's be honest, when we have a game where suddenly you're sitting there playing and you're suddenly confronted by the blank developer wall when a texture doesn't load or a screen doesn't load and all of a sudden, bloop, there it is immersion breaking. I totally get that. And that's what they had to do with Silent Hill, is because they built a 3D world of essentially boxes and storefronts that you were exploring in between monster attacks. They had to do something about this render and draw distance. It was, I don't know who did it, but someone brilliantly said, why don't we just add fog? This gives us two benefits. One, most horror games take place in the dark. Render distance are added by the environmental fear of I have a flashlight and I can only see 6 feet ahead of me. The early stages of this game do take place during the day or the mid to late afternoon when the sun would still be out. It's kind of hard to be totally scared when the sun is out, but the fog fixes this problem. And actually, depending on which sort of edition you're watching, especially if it's a high definition render, they have gone back and added light snow that comes out of the fog. Some say ash, I say snow, but it's something you could also easily get the idea that, on top of being alone, lost and looking for his daughter, being attacked at all corners and can't see anything, now he's cold. And that was a brilliant constraint on, like you said, the creativity. The presentation now as it stands, yeah, everything really does look early 3D. It honestly does. And there's only so much, spackle you can put on this one.
That's very true. But I don't know about you, but especially in this era of early 3D, this is a case, and this is unfortunate because of the price, but this is a case where I really think playing on original hardware is far and away the best option. If you could play this on a CRT, on a PlayStation, or even an optical drive emulator, but on a CRT, that's going to make this look significantly better. It's when you emulate this and everything is showing up on a clear and crisp monitor, and it was never meant to look that way, and now everything is being laid bare in all its glory, however you'd like to define that. I just don't think it looks super good. I played this. I forgot to ask this up front. I apologize. I played this on DuckStation emulated because I have this later in the notes, but unfortunately this game is so expensive. CIB, it's $200 loose, no case, just the disc. It's $110. That is so expensive, and I didn't want to drop that for this episode. But I played on DuckStation. I added a bunch of shaders to make it look a little more authentic, and it worked, but it still was missing. It got to the 95th percentile, but that last 5% is so crucial in making this look how they had wanted it to. And man, oh man, I wish it wasn't so expensive. I wish the whole retro gaming landscape wasn't so expensive.
I know. I agree.
Did you emulate this? You had mentioned to me, I can't remember if you mentioned it on mic, but you mentioned it to me off mic that you had this whenever you were younger physically. So did you play it physically this time?
No, this time, like I said, for me, as much as I love emulation, sometimes trying to get to a chance to get to a modern emulator or play something on emulator is not as, I don't have as much time as I would like. So this one I did have to sort of watch some videos of other people playing, especially modern players coming back to look at the game now to sort of not only refresh my memory, but just kind of absorb their experience through a fresh set of eyes, which is always, impossible to do once you've played through a media or listened to a media or read a media. It's hard to come back at it with a fresh set of eyes, but I can totally understand the concept of wanting to have it on OG hardware if possible. The problem is, of course, it's the first Silent Hill. The series has legacy. It's been around a long time. Collectors tend to love to pay through the nose for a legacy title, and this is it. So I think you did a better job, to be honest with you, emulating it rather than trying to find it originally.
Well, don't praise me too much because Silent Hill 2 is the next episode on the show, and I bought it. I bought it physically. I did pick that one up because I knew about the deeper psychological element going in, and I started it on a handheld, and I was like, this just isn't doing it for me. Why don't I just make a really poor financial decision? And there we are. The story of my life. Before we move away from art, I do want to talk about the art designer for Silent Hill 1, Takayoshi Sato. They were the artist for this game at first because he was young and lacked the level of respect that the higher-ups on his team and Konami had. He was largely given really menial and sort of busy work tasks to do. Not busy work, but the lighter tasks that nobody else wanted to do, like font choices and things like that, menus. And at first, he was going to go uncredited. Like, they weren't going to credit him. And at the time, he was also teaching everybody on the team to do 3D modeling because, again, early 90s, mid 90s. And so he took to the rest of the team, the higher-ups, he took a 3D model video and he said, I'm not going to teach you anymore unless I get credit for what I'm doing, which is awesome. And then they gave in, but really reluctantly. And from what I was reading, from what I understand, it seemed like there was, at every turn, they were just like, I don't know. Do you need the credit? I don't know. And at a certain point, he was like, you know what? I'm just going to do all of this myself. And he, from what I read, it was like he lived in the offices as he created all of these cutscenes by himself. I actually found an old version of his resume on the web archive that corroborates a lot of this. I'll link that in the show notes, but it's great. Like, the title is just like my resume. It's like from his old website. It's just straight up black and white, no frills, no fuss. It's great. It's really good.
There's a good object lesson. People out there, if you're making something and you need an artist, pay your artist. Seriously,
Amen.
Pay your artists.
A freaking men, dude. And I mean, you're no stranger. Obviously, you're no stranger to what good art can do, but especially to a game. I know you recently covered Pentiment, which we also covered on this show too. And I can't imagine that game existing without the art that it has. And, that's because Josh Sawyer is willing to pay his artists. And look what happens.
Absolutely. And my God, that one, and I've listened to your show on it. You and Nick did a fantastic job. But for my own part, the look of Pentiment is important to me because that happens to be one of my favorite time periods of art, the concept of the illuminated manuscript. All those little fun little scribblings that they used to do in the corners of, essentially Bibles, legal deeds, things like that. And they're so rich with meaning. We're still deciphering them in 2024, what all the little scribbles might have meant. But we know that there were largely things like, the artist's personal feelings on events of the day, events happening in some places, the places where they're doing the work. Sometimes it is just fun little doodles. I mean, there still is things like graffiti. Graffiti is a very old topic. But the man hours that these people, I can only imagine putting in, along with having to copy down, say, the word of the Lord in extensive detail for a patron, and then taking time out of their day to just do a little rabbit riding a snail. And I love the fact that in Pentiment, they honestly went for it. It looks so spot on. Even the goofy looking animals, the strange appellations, the movement of the characters being stiff in 2D. I could gush for hours. I genuinely could.
Oh, same here. I am right there with you. I'm sure there is at least one listener somewhere that has not listened to those episodes because they didn't want to or didn't play the game and is hearing this now and saying like, oh, come on. You've had 5 hours to talk about this. Why are we going back to it?
It's a landmark game, to be honest with you. A lot of developers should take notes.
Oh, yeah, totally. So let's talk mechanics. I think this will be a little bit of a shorter discussion. What I have written here is that they haven't aged well, but I I'm looking at this and I'm not even sure that that is totally accurate. So I wanted to ask you, as somebody that played this when it was contemporary, what was your consensus, or if you were sort of linked in at the time, the general consensus of the mechanics back then? I have written here, it's no secret, I don't like playing this game at all, but I don't know if that was what folks thought about this at the time.
That's a tough one because, again, I have to cast my memory back sometime, even to the discourse we had at the time. The internet was still a new thing. Websites were not the greatest. So a lot of it comes from, people actually playing the game, talking to them, or discussions in the various game magazines that existed in the day. Now, again, a lot of people, and I do feel rather unfairly, just because of the controls and mechanics, did try to lump it in with Resident Evil as just a Resident Evil clone, Konami basically trying to get a paycheck off the back of Capcom's work. That is not, at least I don't feel, fair or true. The reality is, we were just used to tank controls back then. When you played games, you had three options. Back in the day, really, it broke down to three options. One, you went to an arcade and you played on a wide arcade stick. Your left hand, if you were right-handed, was the control stick, and your right hand was the button toggle. You just got used to doing it. Your second option was PC gaming. Your right hand is firmly ensconced in your mouse. Your left hand is on your keyboard, on WASD, whatever. And the third, of course, was a simple console, PlayStation, Nintendo, not too long after this, of course, early Xbox. And you just got used to tank controls. Analog was not a thing. But I will say, when eventually the developers started to go in on analog and figured it out so that, up on the stick drives your character forward, left is left, right is right, and you can do it in real time, it was a godsend, and we all forgot tank controls real easy. And those of us who've been around a while keep looking back on it and like, no, man, analog really was it's like moving up from the VHS to the streaming service. There is no going back. Absolutely none. But it just, in the day, it's hard to say because it was just a thing you got used to. That being said, there were times mechanically with Silent Hill, especially the first one, where it didn't seem to function well. Some of the movement controls were a little ridiculous, and I'm glad that they tried not to do situations where they mob your character with enemies, because that would be a no way out situation. Because he moves particularly slow. I mean, literally, the guy falls off stairs. If you play gently, like if you're climbing a step in some of the houses, if you slip your thumb, he will actually fall off the steps. He is uncoordinated. Now, I know that's an in-joke, but I think it speaks to larger, like, this was not a game for speed. This was slow burn, trepidation, we're walking, we're hiking, check the map, open up the map button. God, I'm not even on the right street I intended to go. Hike back, return, return, return. And then, of course, once you get into the alternate world where it's pitch black, the situation does worsen. The discourse of the time, I think, generally was people just went, the controls are the controls. We're here for the story, and we're going to shut up because that's about where we're going to go.
That's a really apt comparison, bringing up going from VHS to streaming services. I'm not so young that I don't remember that. I mean, I grew up plenty with VHS, and my family was the last one in the neighborhood to switch to DVD and get a computer. So I distinctly remember watching VHSs a ton throughout, elementary, middle, and early high school. And it's like you said, we didn't think about it, And then of course, once you get to that HD streaming or HD televisions, then it's like, oh yeah, our eyes have been opened. And we can't go back. We can never go back. So that doesn't surprise me to hear that.
I mean, if you want to, like I said, I'm going to date myself a little bit here. We also had my dad was a technology head during the 80s. We also had a Betamax player.
Oh, no way. That's so cool.
It's so weird, even compared to VHS, because we had them side by side. And occasionally when he would go to the video store to rent a movie, all they would have is the Betamax copy. So it's just essentially one spool as opposed to the two real spools for the VHS player. And the thing functions so weird. The Betamax thing, we actually literally had like a wired rewind button. Its only job was to rewind things, and it rewound it like a microfiche film projector in a library.
That is so cool. I love old technology like that. I've never got to play with a Betamax in person. That is great. We should talk more off mic about this sometime. I don't want to bog down the listeners too much, but I'm really
No, of
fascinated
course.
by that sort of transition in technology. Jumping back to Silent Hill real quick, the mechanics of the game, you are largely going to be doing three things: solving puzzles of some sort, which also involves number two, walking and exploring, and number three is combat. Walking and exploring, we've talked about tank controls. I feel like most people know tank controls. The reason that I didn't mind these tank controls compared to Dino Crisis is because you don't have to be quite as nimble as you had to. I can't remember the Dino Crisis protagonist's name. The
Regina.
Regina, that's it. Red for Regina. I should have known. You don't have to be quite as nimble as her, and the creeps and demons and ghoulies here do not move as quick as the dinos in Dino Crisis, which is what ultimately made me hate that control scheme. But here, like you had said, Harry is an everyman. He runs and he huffs and puffs. The pro tip for these games, or at least I think it's a pro tip, is to go into the options and change the control scheme to be reversed. That way you don't have to hold down X or square or whatever it is for Harry to run. He just runs by default, and you hold that to walk. That is the pro strat. It's going to make your thumbs thank you. That just leaves combat. There's not a whole lot more to say about tank controls. I think, Phil, you covered it pretty well. Combat, it's not good, but it's not awful.
No, it's not awful, but the thing I think it did that stood out a lot compared to, again, Resident Evil, obviously in Silent Hill, is that it gave you more options. Again, Resident Evil, for example, you can carry the combat knight with you, the first one. It's better off sitting in the item box and having you shoot everything. The combat in this game is pretty limited. You get handgun, shotgun, and generic rifle. Okay. The thing it did, though, is it gave you melee options. So you could actually genuinely conserve ammo. And if the gun mechanics, which suck, weren't working out for you, you had a couple of options. First, a kitchen knife, which is all but useless, but it's something. The most commonly used one that people use was about a, I believe, 3-foot long steel pipe. You could pick up I don't know what the hell it is, some kind of maintenance hammer with a big spike on the end of it.
Yeah, the hammer, that was my favorite, yeah.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of people say, and I've watched reviews of it, even a number of other game reviewers off YouTube going, basically once you got a hold of this thing, it was game over for every enemy because it was just so overpowered. There was a hatchet to pick up, and that was kind of about it, is that, Harry at least could swing something around and hit an enemy and be able to bring it down. The most interesting thing that Harry can do, of course, is a finish off or coup de grace maneuver, where if you bring the monster down, if you don't kill it, eventually it will get back up. So he just sort of runs over and ever so gently with his Doc Marten loafers thumps it in the side, and that usually finishes it off.
It's very comical. Like, it makes me chuckle every time it happens because you just kind of give it a little you just bap.
Yeah, a little like the cat's playing around the toilet. You just kind of nudge him away from the bowl with your foot. Yeah, come on, get out of there. And just this thing, he must have horrendous foot odor because these things just die. Like the pool of gore spreads afterwards.
I use melee a lot for the exact reason that you said. It conserves ammo. And I'm the kind of person in these games where I am saving that ammo until I need to use it. I would much rather... Well, actually, in Silent Hill, so this is something I'm running into with Silent Hill 2, is that the combat to me tends to swing more toward the tedious and the annoying than it does the scary. So in most situations, I choose to run away. Partly that's because, at least in Silent Hill 1, these enemies will respawn. So if you kill all of the, let's say, the gray children in an area, you go through a door and then you come back, they're going to be there again. So you just wasted all that ammo and or time. So I kind of feel like it's scarier to just run away. You're always under that pressure to move. You've got to think on your feet and then run on them too, ideally. It just makes it more tense, and I love that. You mentioned the hammer being overpowered. It is. You can you just clock them down. you're unstoppable. The problem with the hammer is that you can't move with it. You have to get into your ready stance with R2, I think. And, with the knife, you can move around a little bit, but with the hammer, you are locked in place. You are at the pitcher's mound. Pitcher's mound? You are at the batting mound? I'm not a baseball guy. I shouldn't have done that analogy.
Yeah, we're out there playing the fourth quarter down at the hockey goal, I guess. Look, I'm no, sports guy either. But yeah, that's the thing, is that for some reason with the larger weapons, Harry stands there. He looks like a golfer who's got to really take a really bad shit, and he's on the fourth hole. And he just sort of like mechanically picks up his weapon and not swings it so much as drops it with this incredibly whooshy noise. At least with the handguns and whatnot, even the rifle, you can move a little bit. You have some room to sort of like slowly walk while firing, which is something they also fairly uniquely did at this time. But you really kind of had to know what you were doing. And honestly, there's just so much open room in the realms of Silent Hill between, unless you're stuck in a small corridor, you're honest to God, your option is better just to run.
Yep. Absolutely. You had mentioned that's the other thing that I wanted to touch on, that I wanted to respond to. You had mentioned that the shooting mechanics are garbage, are not good. On paper, you might see that this game has auto aiming, and you might think, okay, like that's great. We don't have to worry about aiming. This will help me conserve ammo. The reality of it is more complicated than that, as it usually is. You hold it, so just like with the weapons, with the melee weapons, you hold R2, but instead of getting into your stance, you aim. If nothing's there, you're just going to aim forward, okay, no big deal. But if there's an enemy in the proximity, you'll auto-target onto them. Now, if it's just one, okay, not so bad, usually. It's when multiple start coming in, whether it's from all angles or whether they're kind of stacked on top of each other, right behind each other, then the game doesn't really know what to do. Especially if some of those enemies are flying, the flying demons. It was such a gamble if I could ever target one until it was like right on top of me. And then I take damage and Harry does the hit stun animation and then he gets back, back to business. That frustrated me so much. I don't know what they could have done to make it better realistically. I just know that what is there was really annoying and, led to me doing exactly what we both have said. Just run.
This is also a game that I don't know why this decision was made. Again, maybe this is, maybe they had a good reason for it. But the problem is Silent Hill is a game where the closer your enemy is, the more damage the bullet does. And that was the problem, is that if you really wanted a good impactful hit with a handgun, shotgun, even the rifle, your enemy pretty much had to be on top of you. And if they're going to take a couple hits, you may have a problem real quick on your hands. Well, I don't want to be close to these enemies. So my option is either, I guess I'm going to have to wait till they get on top of me, use melee, or run. And if you notice, if you track an enemy in the distance, Harry will attempt to aim. You could empty your entire clip of ammo. You could shoot all day. He'll never hit a fucking thing until they're right on top of him. Then they start taking hits.
Right. Sometimes you might need to do that, especially if the screen is getting busier. And, the game, how to phrase this? The game is not scarce. Oh my gosh. The game is not scarce in ammo. There's plenty to be found. It's just you have to know where to look. And if this is your first time through, you're probably not going to be scrubbing every single corner and every single bush. And you're going to miss a lot of the ammo. So you're probably, and I mean, unless you're using a guide, which is fine, you're not going to be stocked up to the gills. You're not going to have just reams and reams of bullets to spray and pray, which makes, it adds to this juggling of deciding what to do in each and every moment. And in some ways, that's kind of a positive. This friction from the aiming system kind of creates, doesn't create it. It adds to this tension of making a decision in the moment. Like, what do I do? Do I run? Do I stop and take this thing down? Can I get to the next door before this thing gets to me? So in a weird roundabout kind of way, it works if you squint your eyes.
Yeah, if you squint your eyes and don't ask a whole lot of questions, it's lovely.
Exactly.
I don't know. Maybe as I'm getting older, I'm getting more generous in games. I'm tending to more like you know what? I'm here to have fun. I'm here for a good time, not a long time. I can overlook some stuff unless it's ridiculously egregious.
Yeah, and it's not. I wouldn't call anything that this game does ridiculously egregious. It's, when we criticize it here, we're just doing it from our armchairs or gamer chairs of being critics. And, at the end of the day, it is about exactly what you said about having a good time. Ultimately, whether that good time for you is being intellectually challenged or just entertained, your mileage may vary, but nothing about this is too egregious. One thing that this game arguably does very well is sound and music. So let's talk about that for a second. Let's start with the music. This was composed by Akira Yamaoka, really influenced by the Twin Peaks composer Angelo Badalamenti, R.I.P. Particularly, there are a few tracks throughout here that made me think Twin Peaks, but there's this really bizarre ending scene that I want to talk about when we get there, that is playing a track called Other Side. It feels so Twin Peaks to me. It is, and in some ways, it's kind of like a lounge jazz kind of thing, and in some ways that sort of adds to this idea of being Lynchian, because you've got this so buttoned up music against the backdrop of this game that is Silent Hill, and it creates a fun little friction there. I love it. That's kind of my TLDR with the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack. It really grew on me. At first, I was kind of like, oh yeah, this is pretty good, but the more I played, the more I really like it. It begins with this really brilliant opening track that uses this great mandolin to great effect, and it goes into, sort of like a guitar, drum, bass, keyboards kind of deal. But a lot of the in-game music is very industrial, using a lot of found music, or found percussion, sort of banging on sheet metal, hammers on anvils, things like that. Prepared piano, where you might affix some quarters underneath the piano strings to give them a sort of, they're still ringing their pitch, but they get this very metallic, percussive sort of sound. Instruments being played in atypical ways, like maybe taking a bow from a violin and bowing a cymbal. And it's full of stuff like that, and it's used to such brilliant effect. It is so cool, especially whenever the world begins to shift into the alternate reality. That a lot of that starts to become really apparent. It's really great. What did you think of that?
Well, I have to apologize at this point. I am no musician. I am a writer and a visual artist. As in my deepest heart, believe me, I truly wish I could play an instrument. Unfortunately, I have a tin ear and absolutely no musical talent. On top of this, I'm a metalhead. So a lot of my music is either played hard, loud, fast, and usually with a lot of screaming. So I'm not perhaps as versed in a lot of other styles and whatnot. I generally know the concepts, but I'm not deep in the lore. But the soundtrack to this game is special in a way. When I first played it, like I said, the opening song that plays over essentially what's the opening cutscene. At first, my brain at the time went, what the hell is this Godfather Pizzeria shit they're playing in the background here? But then it just it sort of went into, like you said, percussion and drums and the sort of light rock track. And I went, that's interesting. I haven't, at least in my experience, I had not heard that combination before. But this game has no ambient soundtrack. There's generally not a whole lot of music playing in the background, even in cutscenes. But what it can do is that there will be times where it is, like you said, it's heavy industrial. It sounds like machines grinding, pistons going, someone hammering on trash cans. It's meant to ratchet up that tension even further. And holy God, does it do it. There will be times where you're in a hallway that's dark, especially on the other side. There actually won't be an enemy for miles, but it may start on that ambient sort of boom, 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 and you're sitting there going, is there a boss? What's going on? Because we've all been trained to think, well, when the music ratchets up, there is going to be some kind of massive boss fight. Even in the modern day, as much as many people may get sick of me saying this, Dark Souls does this a lot. There's no ambient tracks until, in a lot of cases, a boss shows up, and then all of a sudden the chorus arrives, and they begin singing their, great a cappella while you're slapping the hell out of this thing. And you sit there and go, wait a minute. I didn't realize that there was no ambient music until there was ambient music. Silent Hill 1 does this a lot, and it's really meant to drive that tension, and it really does do it so well. You can feel your heart really kind of beginning to pump when this stuff is going on because it's discordant, it hurts the ear, it hurts that part of the brain, it drives the concept of terror. We know that sound long has been used to the effect of scares. In fact, in some cases, we've learned to weaponize sound, and they do it exceptionally well in this game.
Yeah, for having a self-described tin ear, a lot of your talking points are really cogent and exactly what I would say if I were talking about this at length. Weaponized sound is such a great description for some of these tracks because, something that a lot of folks getting into new music meaning like contemporary classical music for the first time, something that they have to they have to get used to changing their hats, so to speak, to not look for melody, to not look for rhythm, to not look for form, but to instead look for interactions between soundscapes. And that's part of what makes this soundtrack interesting too. The other thing that makes this interesting is, let's go back to that notion that we were talking about before, this idea of lingering tension. There's always tension there, and they ramp it up and they ramp it up, but then you never quite get that satisfying release. The sneeze never comes, despite you looking at the lights to get it to. This music, it's no Dark Souls. With this, you get your tension in the music. It's making you think there's a boss. It's making you think there's one. And then it goes silent. And, after 10 minutes of walking, you get to the first boss, and there's no music. None at all. I love that choice. I wrote it later. We'll get to it, but oh my gosh, that I was like, that's such a clever subversion. They made me so anxious to meet this guy, and then they took the music away, and I forgot about it, and now here he is.
Yeah, I think, as you say, clever subversion is another one of the hallmarks of this game. Is, we have, as often in media, we get trained to think certain ways about certain types of games. The JRPG has always trained us to have a large party, and everyone's going to have a unique ability, and someone's always going to be the healer, and it's probably going to be the goofy girl, and friendship was, the real, goal along the way besides killing God. Horror movies have done this for a long time too. There's going to be tension, 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 and the release is going to be a jump scare or the killer kills somebody. What Silent Hill does is, like you said, it gets to that point where it gives you that tension, but the tension is unending. There's maybe 2 jump scares in the whole game, or a subversion of the cat scare, but then they take music away. And then later you confront the thing. And it's never quite, it keeps you enough off balance that you're kind of really not sure what to expect. Sometimes you have to just be like and I started blasting sort of environment versus let's think this through because I'm maybe low on health. I don't know what's coming. And did I miss items? Because again, against that background, they don't show up very well. So you have to literally scum the environment with the X button going, is there a thing? Is there a thing? Is there a thing? Is there a thing? Thank God there's a thing. And they just kind of keep you enough off balance with the whole deal that it's hard to recover.
Yeah, really well said, Phil. Your reputation of being well-spoken precedes you. But
Thank you.
Off balance is such a great way to describe how the tension, the combined tension of everything, the camera work, the lack of visual fidelity, the music, the lack of real mechanics outside of just running and shooting, the cohesion of all of this is greater than the sum of its parts, and off balance, I think, is exactly what they're trying to do, and they do it so well. But something they don't do so well, we would be remiss if we did not talk about the voice acting. Let's talk about the voice acting.
Oh, God.
It's not great. It's very particular whenever he's talking about finding his daughter, how nonchalant he is. And then there's an all-time classic at the very end where somebody, in a big climactic moment, somebody just says to the villain, "You're easy." It's like, what? It's so wild. I would love to hear why some of these choices were made.
I don't know, because there's enough bad takes Or there really should have been like a second take in some of these.
Yeah, it's not just some weird takes. It definitely, I think you could definitely tell that this was recorded. Everybody recorded their lines by themselves, because there are some interactions that just do not feel like they heard the other person, and they're just reading a
Hmm.
script. You can tell. It's very strange. I've heard a lot of people say that this is very endearing, though,
Hmm.
and that it's maybe a callback to B horror movies. I don't buy that personally. If it's endearing to you, that's great. I don't buy that it was intentional. I think that I was gonna make the argument you listen to a lot of early voiced games, like I'm thinking Tomba 2, just because I've got Tomba on the brain, like I always do. And the voice acting is kind of quaint and charmingly amateur. But this came out in '99. This was towards the end of the PlayStation's lifespan.
Absolutely.
So it's very perplexing. I didn't do any intense googling on this, but if I find anything that I can include in the show notes, I will make an edit to myself and tell you to look there.
Silent Hill is not Jill Sandwich levels of bad reads, but there's enough odd tonality and flat points in which should be a lot more tension filled or should be a much more scary scene that you're kind of sitting there going, I mean, is Harry drunk? Is he on Valium? Is that the reason he crashed his car? Recently, and I don't know how true this is, I could have bad information here. I only heard this recently that the actor who voiced Harry Mason is the same actor who voiced Dracula in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And I can only think in my head the comparison of those two games where the same actor who 2 years earlier went,
"What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets."
to,
My daughter. I've got to find her.
and the dissonance in my own brain is like, I can't do this. That's got to be bullshit. This can't be the same guy, can it? Seriously? If it is, I'm sort of speechless. I don't really have an adequate response. There are times when the line reads are okay, and there are times when you get, especially the early conversations when you get into the early game with Harry, and he's even talking to Sybil, the police lady, and I know he's trying to sound like a frustrated and tired man who may be injured and is trying to figure out what happened to his little girl. And she's like, you would think she'd be more like a scene like Mariska Hargitay from Law and Order SVU going, and where is your daughter? You're a local. Tell me what's going on here. And he should be like, lady, I don't know. My car's crashed. And he's like, we were coming to Silent Hill. I'm just a tourist. And she's sitting there going, yeah, I guess that tracks. Lady, there's a bat demon 2 feet out that window, clinging to it, wondering what the goddamn burger menu is like because he's fallen asleep. That's just my opinion. I would love to get into voice acting myself. I keep somehow not finding time to do it. But I'm no great actor here. But yeah, I guess that's what we had in '99. It's the best we could do because this was still shovelware and the companies were trying to get it out fast and make a buck. I don't know.
That's funny you say that. I've also kind of always wanted to get into voice acting a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I think it'd be fun. I've always secretly also pined to be on stage, like as a theater person, but maybe in another lifetime. Something that I wonder, you had mentioned the Jill Sandwich line. Resident Evil 1 isn't exactly known for having an amazing dub. I'll go on record and say that I haven't played it yet, so I could be wrong, but everything I've seen has been kind of lovingly amateurish. I just wonder maybe voice acting back then wasn't taken nearly as seriously as it is now, and maybe in Japan the culture was a little different and the standards weren't quite as high. I don't know. There's got to be an explanation. Like I'm sure nobody listened back to that and said, yeah, that's my best work. I co-sign that.
No, I think it's more the concept, and I'm not trying to get an East versus West debate here, and I do realize that by culture, the importance of things can change, but 1999 was not that far removed at that point from like the mid 80s, when I don't think voice acting in games, let alone cartoons, or any other voice acting thing was not well regarded. A lot of what times voice actors, there's a reason the Voice Actors Guild is separate from SAG, because they're kind of like the peasants or the ephemera of the acting world, even if they're professionals. There was, especially in the 80s in cartoons, there were, looking back on it, just so many bad takes and so many bad line reads that people were like, fuck it, it's a kid's show, get it out there, I don't really care, we got one take and we got him for 2 hours, we were already like having to pay this asshole's parking, just finish the job. And sometimes I think that happened in Japan as well, but the strange thing is, if you listen to like what was coming out in anime around that time, and I don't mean the English dub, I mean the actual spoken Japanese dubbed lines for the characters, they were often very clear. The voice acting was very good. I think perhaps it may have been more of an American thing to be a little slipshod back then, versus a Japanese standard. And again, I'm just sort of, talking out my ass on this one. I don't know the specifics, but I think if anything, it was more of an American problem, simply because of how they treated voice actors, and that has obviously changed in the decades since then.
Yeah, you might be right. You might be onto something there. That makes more sense whenever you actually think about it. Either way, this game, Silent Hill 1, that is, the voice acting is serviceable. It's not great. You might find it endearing. You're going to hear some of those lines peppered throughout here as we talk through story stuff, which we are about to transition to. So before we do that, if you are a new listener, we're not going to spoil anything up front, so we're not going to spoil the ending until we get there. For this episode, it's not going to be strictly beat by beat because so much of this is exploration, and, stopping to talk about every single puzzle would be super duper annoying. So we'll only talk about some here and there. We'll get through from the beginning to the very end, and I know that I'm going to kind of lean on Phil's expertise here because there are some things that I'm a little fuzzy on just based on what I played and what I read. But before we get there, Phil, are there any final thoughts, final parting words that you want to talk about with Silent Hill, with regard to Silent Hill, before we go through the story?
The only thing I can really say at this point is that if you've been listening up to this point and you're thinking, I don't know about this game, no, seriously, this is a classic for a reason. If you can play it, do play it. Just realize that it is very much a game of its time, and some of the controls that we're used to now just simply weren't there then. If you can get past that, you are in for, honestly, one of the best psychological horror experiences on a game console that even by today's standards you can still find.
Wow, okay. I don't think that I'm quite as hot on it. I like the game quite a bit. I don't think I'll replay it certainly anytime soon, but I think, I agree with you. If somebody out there is interested in the series at all, it's worth a playthrough, at least once. And a playthrough, not a watch through on YouTube. That's fundamentally different with horror games, I feel. So give it a play if you can. Don't drop money on it if you can help it, unless you're a sicko like those of us that collect. But whether you've played it already or whether you're going to go play it now, we'll still be here. We'll be talking because we're going to go through the story of Silent Hill. Okay, and kicking us off is our final piece of community correspondence, and this comes from Dave Jackson. He's going to introduce us to the story. Here's what Dave has to say. I just recently played Silent Hill for the first time and was surprised to see that it's a bit different from Silent Hill 2. My expectations set me up to be pleasantly surprised, though. I think the story is pretty fun, and the use of darkness, fog, and camera angles are constantly praised for a reason. The opening sequence following Cheryl into the fog and alleyways is an incredible opening to the game. All in all, Silent Hill is a really good game and sets a strong foundation for its even better sequel. Okay, so with this game, a lot of my notes are probably going to be a little more summarized than usual, but in particular, I do want to go through this intro sequence that Dave had mentioned. I think this intro sequence is pretty strong. It's not like a game changer or anything, but it's fairly strong. So let's talk about it. The actual intro, if we're thinking about intro movies, the intro movie here is a blend of scenes that are upcoming in the game and setting up what is going on. It's a combination of how did we get here and where are we going. And, you know, on top of it being in front of an amazing composition, it gives it this sense of dream-like reverie, like where it's a combination of the past and the future. How does the present fit into there? What is reality? What is real? It's very uncertain and floaty and unconscious while also being conscious. It's very neat, but the gist of it is this. Harry was driving with his daughter into this town of Silent Hill when all of a sudden a spooky figure wandered onto the road and caused Harry to swerve, and they got into a car accident. And when he wakes up, Cheryl, his daughter, is gone. I also made a note here. This trope in horror of somebody driving along on the back roads and out walks a spooky person, that gets me every time. I'm terrified of that driving at night. I think about that a lot. Like, what if that would happen to me? Oh God, I'd be so scared. And if it wasn't horror, then it would be like somebody that's walking out to try and get me to stop and like rob me in my car, which is just as scary. Very scary. I love this trope.
Absolutely. Rick, I kind of get the idea where you're from. We're both from PA originally. If back in where I was from in PA, if somebody walked out onto the road at night, it was often so pitch black because of the woods and many back roads of the rural community, you were probably going to end up killing them before you hit the brake long enough not to, because they could have just jumped out at any time. If they did, it was probably because either they're drunk, they're high, or they're trying to kill you. Where I live now, if someone walks out in front of me while I'm driving at night, well, there's usually like more than like 24 people around, and that person's probably on fentanyl. So we're just like, yeah.
So when Harry wakes up after this car crash, the first thing we're going to do when we take control of him is look around this very quiet town of Silent Hill. It's extremely foggy. There is snow falling. Which I can't remember if they mentioned at that time of year is odd, but I think it is. And in the fog ahead, just a bit out of reach, we see Cheryl, our daughter. I'm pretty sure it's Cheryl, right? It's not the other one, Alessa?
Yeah, it's Cheryl. It's Cheryl.
And what we're going to do here is we're going to chase her down, and, you know, it leads to the first sign, if you ignore the ghost girl, that something is very, very wrong. Chasing her down leads to the first sign, if you don't count the ghost girl, that something is very wrong here. There is a bloodbath of a massacre in an alleyway. Something tore a dog to shreds. It's a little, I mean, it's PlayStation 1 graphics, sure, but, you know, imagine this being displayed on a beautiful CRT where things don't look blocky, things look more blended. This looks scary. Something else that I noticed here is as you are walking down these alleyways, these twisting alleyways, the camera angles are behaving in a way that they don't behave in throughout most of the rest of the game. They're twisting a little bit more to enhance this sense of where am I going? Am I in a maze and I just don't know it? And they're switching between being dynamic and static, like up in the corner. That doesn't happen very often throughout the rest of this game. But here, it works really well.
Absolutely. No, it doesn't. It's a really good setup because these alleyways they're thin. They actually fit the character. Harry looks like he physically fits in the alley and just barely, except for some spots. And the camera angle does something unusual, especially for a game of its time where it begins to tilt like it's a funhouse mirror, just sort of trying to deal with the new sort of static angles. And it's not just this dog that gets torn up, which is bad enough. Obviously, that's horrific in and of itself. Visceral horror is part of horror, surely. But the further you go down, You find things like a destroyed wheelchair, a body under a sheet that's freshly killed and is still dripping, which ends in some kind of vivisected corpse strung up to a chain link fence with what appears to the world to be barbed wire. And at this point, it's gotten so dark that Harry has had to light a lighter to see by. Lighters don't traditionally cast a lot of light. So by the time he realizes this, he is stuck in an alley, utterly defenseless. And at this point, he turns around, and there are a bunch of gray children with butcher knife hands coming right for him.
Yeah, this is a forced encounter. You can't win. I didn't know that at first because I couldn't get away from them because of the tank controls, and I got really, really agitated until I realized, like, oh, this is supposed to happen. Even if you run away to where you entered, the entrance is now fenced off. Like, you can't get out no matter what. That is a very cool scene that you described that we come upon. That mangled corpse is strung up with a barbed wire crucifixion. It is really evocative, and that's the first sign that some kind of religion or religion adjacent thing is going to be a part of this. You know, a lot of, and to be fair, okay, a lot of Japanese games do use Christian imagery just because they think it's cool. See also Neon Genesis Evangelion. But, you know, here, it turns out there is a spiritual aspect to the rest of this game. It's not Christian, don't get me wrong. They do, though, draw from Jewish and Kabbalah lore, so that's pretty interesting. There is something funny going on spiritually. They're not just saying their prayers and going to bed. Something's going on here.
And this hospital imagery, the wheelchair, the corpse on the gurney, is going to be something that's going to keep coming up throughout the game. It doesn't make sense in the beginning, but as it will be explained later in the game, there's a reason that this sterile hospital environment and sterile hospital equipment keeps coming up tied in with this occultism.
Oh, yeah, you're right. That is something that I did not necessarily put two and two together with whenever I was rereading that, but you are right.
And I mean, I didn't realize it when I first played it. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I mean, yeah, it's funhouse, haunted house shit, but as the game goes on, you realize, why are there wheelchairs? What's with the gurneys, IVs, hospital equipment, and the nurses, which are very different from its sequel game nurses, but it's all tied to this occult background.
Yes. One more interesting little tidbit. These little gray babies that walk up to you, they're about, knee height, wielding stabby knives. I forget if it's in the Japan and the Europe release or just the Europe release, but one of them, because of censorship laws and things like that, it didn't pass because they didn't want you to, be killing children. Turns out that's a sensitive topic. They're replaced by a different kind of enemy called mumblers that look still creepy, but they're not little ghost children.
And it's kind of funny, again, these little ghost babies, and there actually is a ghost baby you will encounter in the game, precursor to PT and the fetus in the sink. But these guys are crazy little things, and they happen to latch onto your knees right at genital height. So it honestly looks for the world like they're stabbing you in the leg and trying to rip your dick off, which, if, you're into the Saw franchise or something like that, can also elicit a type of visceral horror for being maimed in a very sensitive area of your body. But they have modified them so that they don't 100% look like little kids, but it's very obvious that they get associated with children.
Yes, and one of the things that this game, I can't remember if I saw it in game or if I read it in the wiki. When we get there in the story, I want to talk to you about it. All of these demon creatures are there for a reason, and it's a reason that I really love. I just don't remember if I learned it in game or if I learned it surfing the wiki. So we'll hold off on that. Okay. After you wake up after that encounter, Harry is in a diner, and we meet our first and one of the only friendly NPCs, a cop named Sybil Bennett. She is from Brahms, which is spelled Brahms, which, by the way, this game has a lot of typos in the English version. One of the funniest is at the very end. the phrase "the end is nigh" is said several times, but it's misspelled as "the end is nay," and I cracked up reading that. I was like, "Am I the end is nay?" Horsey time. But anyway, that's
Wilbur, we're gonna kill you.
Sybil doesn't know what's going on, and she doesn't know who Cheryl is or where Cheryl is, and you talk to her for a little bit, and Harry at a certain point, by the way, I mean, we're not going to call this out every time, but the voice acting here is funny. This is what Phil was alluding to earlier with Cheryl. Where is my daughter Cheryl?
My daughter. I've got to find her.
It's great.
The Harrybot 9000 is looking for his spawn. Cheryl, where is Cheryl? Zzz, dot matrix printing.
So you're about to leave this diner that you're in because you're looking for Cheryl, and Sybil, the cop, just gives him a gun. She says, make sure you take this. If you're going out there, take this. And she also does the horror trope of foreshadowing, like, if you're waving that around, make sure you're not shooting it at me. It's, it's Chekhov's Sybil's gun is I think what they call that in literature.
Officer, you're just going to give up your service weapon like that. Good plan. Good plan.
Yeah, very normal thing for a cop to do. This is, closing out this introduction section. Before leaving, there's a radio on the table, starts picking up all this static. And right as it gets to its peak, this demon flies through the window. And that's, also where we get to use our gun for the first time. That's a characterization of Silent Hill, is we're using a radio. It doesn't functionally work, but it does as enemies get near, the static will begin to get louder and louder. And that adds, one, it's just a creepy sound, radio static. For whatever reason, it just is. But it adds to this idea, like, when do you find radio static? It's whenever you're not where you want to be and when you don't know where you are. You're driving out in the country roads and you're not getting signal. You're surfing the stations and you can't quite find the station you want on the dial. You're lost. And it adds to this idea, like, we never quite know where we are. Are we in reality even? We don't know. And I love that. I love this little mechanic. Although, I will say, it does get a little annoying after a while, hearing all that static.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, you can turn the radio off, but the radio is essentially your early warning system for something being in the neighborhood that's going to try and attack you or that you need to run from or fight. And it's not just the static. As the monster gets closer, the static changes to this very distinct sort of almost fire alarm sound, like the kind of fire alarm you would find in an old school, where it's just a raw, untuned bell being hammered by an untuned hammer. It's loud as hell, and it's meant to annoy because it's obviously going to alert you to danger. You need to leave the premises immediately. And the ringing does not stop until you lovingly tap the critter with your Doc Martens there and get it to hush up. Then it'll stop. There are times, especially if you're wandering and there's nothing nearby, the static will stop, but then it starts again. And it's kind of, after a while, it stops being tension-filled. It does, like you said, it becomes grating. It becomes a little harsh on the ear, especially if you've got headphones on. It will become a little problematic. But it's also that other unique mechanic of the game is because no other horror game gives you an early warning system. Silent Hill does.
Yeah, I can't imagine turning this off. I mean, yeah, it'll make the game more challenging, but it also takes away a crucial element of tension. I don't think turning that off is a good idea. I don't think people should do it. Play games the way that I'm telling you. Don't play them how you want to.
Play them the way the developer intended. Suspended upside down, being hung by your butt.
So that concludes what I functionally see as the introduction to this game, and now a lot of this is going to be exploring and doing puzzles. We're not going to go through every single thing. And indeed, even my notes, I mean, I've got like 5 pages of notes here, and we're probably going to jump around quite a bit. The first area we go to is the school, and I just wanted to talk about one puzzle in particular.
Absolutely.
It's a puzzle that is, I don't know if it's famous or infamous, but it's the piano puzzle here. And I was listening to a podcast that I like quite a bit, and they were saying how a lot of people get stumped on this and how it's so easy. How do people not know this? I don't think this is worded well at all, and I want to make my case for it here. So this also kind of gives you a good overview of what these puzzles in Silent Hill are going to be like. It's a combination of these riddles And then also the Resident Evil style of thing where you find a token with an image of a swan on it, and that becomes a key, and you've got several of those. The clue here, there's a piano in a room that you have to play a certain melody, even though the piano is broken. And the melody is listed on this piece of paper, or on the wall, as a riddle. And here's what it says. First flew the greedy pelican, eager for the reward, white wings flailing. Then came a silent dove, flying beyond the pelican as far as he could. A raven flies in, flying higher than the dove, just to show he can. A swan glides in to find a peaceful spot next to another bird. Finally, out comes a crow, coming quickly to a stop, yawning and then napping. Who will show the way? Who will be the key? Who will lead to the silver reward? So, obviously, piano keys are white and black. You've got your standard non-accidentals as white, your accidentals C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, etc. as black keys. And these birds represent that. White swan, white key. Black crow, black key. Fine. And then the rest of this is sort of just like one of those brain teaser puzzles. That's not my issue. My issue with this is that the piano, you've got access to one full octave. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, with all the accidentals in between. Fine. The way this is worded makes it sound like you are going to start on C, the first note, and go all the way up as far as you can, and you don't. The pelican is the first bird, right? The pelican says, first flew the greedy pelican, eager for the reward. It's greedy, so it's stopping quickly. But it doesn't stop on the first white key. It stops on the second one. And you're like, what? Why? And then there's another one. Then came a silent dove flying beyond the pelican as far as he could. You'd think, okay, so the dove is going to fly to the farthest white note. It doesn't. It flies to the second farthest white note. Why? It's just not worded well. Like, beyond that, like the relations of the crow next to the pelican, the raven above the dove, like, yeah, I totally get that. And I suppose that last one, the raven being above the dove, okay, like that should tell you that the dove is not as far away as it could be. I just think this is worded very weird, and I don't like it. And if you struggled with this and you're listening, just know that, like, I commiserate with you. I understand. I wouldn't have worded this riddle in this way. It's not you. Your brain's not broken. You're not dumb. This is just kind of sloppy.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know if it's a translation error, which it could very well be. It was still very much the time where Japanese to English translation was not exactly a solid science. Now, this one, from my perspective, again, I don't know how to play a piano. I know we had one in the house. My mother knew how to play it. My brain, this is what a problem I think can begin in Silent Hill. Based on the difficulty level you pick for the game, the puzzles can actually become harder. The puzzles can become more obtuse and esoteric. Even playing on normal, this is what we have. And it's what I call kind of an overthinking of the puzzles. And I think this is what stumps a lot of people. And had I not been using a guide, I probably would have gotten stumped very early too. And this is an early puzzle. This is your first big exploration area outside of the town. So my brain is like, okay, am I supposed to start on the right or am I supposed to start on the left? What am I doing here? You play a piano with both hands. Am I like plucking along one at a time? Do I have to like consider like where Harry would put his fingers to begin to play? Am I playing rapidly? And then you begin pressing keys at random. Some of them play and some of them go kerchunk. So now which one am I picking? The one that makes a tone or the one that went kerchunk? Turns out it's the ones that go kerchunk are the ones you're supposed to be hitting. So, and the puzzle, like you said, you can go back, you can walk up to it any time. This is a non-combat zone, so you can go check what you're doing as much as you want. It's, like I said, I think it's a translation error. It is not worded well. You have to make an assumption. I kind of, this is a weird outside thought, but what if you don't know what a pelican looks like? And it could be blue for all you know. You're going to have to assume, like, I guess it's a white bird. You know, doves. Most people, you know, we've heard the concept of a dove being white, although kind of reality they're more a little bit gray, but that's a nitpick.
What if you've only ever seen the movie Black Swan? You think it's
exactly?
You didn't know.
I saw a live swan once. That's the only reason I know swans are white, other than pictures in a book. And it was a pissy animal. And again, placement of like I think the last one the crow was the last, the raven was above the dove or something, or above the swan, and you have 3 black key options. Well, which one am I picking? You have to sort of go. It became a memorization puzzle more than anything else. Which were the ones that went kerchunk?
Now that we're talking about this out loud, I'm realizing something extremely basic that I never realized before. The title of this poem is Birds Without a Voice, so that would obviate that first key that makes a sound. So my criticism is totally invalid. I'm walking that back. I was wrong, everybody. Don't worry.
Now wait a minute. Pelicans don't make a noise. Doves coo. Ravens absolutely screech and squawk, and so do crows. I hear them every morning outside my door. They're talking all over the fucking place. Swans hiss, so they absolutely make a goddamn sound. It's like people thinking giraffes don't make noise till you actually hear it, and you're like, holy shit, that thing made a noise. No, they can vocalize just fucking fine. But I know, again, we're esoteric. I know we're nitpicking. It's silly. It's just a silly puzzle. It's badly translated. But this is the process where the overthinking can begin. And then you find yourself sitting for an hour on a puzzle that probably should have taken you 5 minutes, tap it out, collect the item that you need, and go on with the rest of your evening.
Yeah, I tend to overthink a lot and miss really obvious things like what just happened. But I also did, like, full disclosure, I used a guide for most of this. I wasn't like married to it, but I kept it I kept it open and I would just look over. The imagery of a bloody piano, though, looks very, very cool. I love that.
Absolutely. That reminds me kind of what I would imagine what would happen if you had like some kind of like slasher movie in a music college.
Yeah, that would be very cool. Someone should make that movie.
God knows they may have. I don't know. The 80s were a wild time, man.
Moving through this school, we're going to be transitioning, and this happens throughout the rest of the game, in and out of what I don't know. I think I kind of referred to it as different things. Alternate world, the alternate reality, quite a bit. And when that happens, things get darker. The environments that you're in get more industrialized, rusty, red and browns are the color palettes. This is something. Maybe we'll talk about it when we get to the end. I'm not 100% on as to how you're going back and forth, but that is a sort of portal of sorts that you're going to be going in throughout this whole game.
This is also, and I've heard it called the Dark World as opposed to the Standard World 2 or the Alternate World, like you said. This is also when more likely you are to see a trope in the game of hanging bodies. Bodies suspended to a wall, usually with a sheet, or eviscerated and hanging. This is where a lot of, especially in the school part, the Midwich Elementary School, does a lot of heavy lifting in the early game to really set up the theme of what will carry you through the remainder of the game. And an elementary school is a brilliant choice to suddenly be turned horrific. Again, it's elementary school. Yeah, not every kid wants to be there, but it's generally a safe place where everything's supposed to be sunny. The teachers will be nice. You go through to get your grades. You have a snack time, stuff like that. You have PE. You play a little bit of music. You do a little, cut and paste art sort of stuff. Then you go home for the day. Honey, what'd you do at school today? Oh, we learned how to count today, and I painted watercolor. And that's supposed to be it. The horrors of middle school and high school have not arrived yet. But suddenly, you've turned this place into a bloodbath. And again, 1999, we weren't seeing things like school shootings like we do today, where now, realistically, an elementary school can very honestly be turned into a bloodbath in the most horrific way possible. But this one, it was supposed to be fantasy. It was supposed to be scary. It was supposed to be subverting a trope. And oh God, does it do it.
Yeah, that goes back to that idea of the Lynchian creating the grotesque within the everyday. It's a really cool setting. Really cool. You'll fight the first boss here in the school. It's a giant lizard. There's a little miniature fable that you can read as a memo that will kind of tell you how to beat this thing. You just shoot it in its open mouth.
Actually, I wanted to point this out if you don't mind. I love
Yeah.
this particular bit of foreshadowing because I hadn't really considered it up until that time. I hadn't really seen it. Now we see bits and pieces when they do environmental storytelling. Even if as much as you hate them, if you do, like the Bethesda Fallouts, like Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, does a good job with environmental storytelling. This particular one, and I love this little fable, because somewhere in the transition between the normal world and the dark world, you find your first weapon upgrade, the shotgun. And the shotgun in this game is not a standard, full-length hunting rifle. It's a Wild West sawed-off double barrel. So when Harry picks it up to actually hold it, you can see that he really has to hold it with both hands because of the kick. This particular puzzle is about a hunter, basically a hunter calling out a lizard and saying, I will do you, I will defeat you. And the lizard in the onomatopoeia, in the anamorphism of the ancient fables of Aesop, says, well, then I shall devour you in one bite. And when you go to, the creature goes to do that, the hunter confidently pulls his arrow back and shoots it into the undefended mouth, which is telling you, the player, you're going to have to sack up on this one because you're going to have to bait the creature into coming to you and doing what would be an instant kill, no recovery, one bite, and literally walking up and plugging the 12 gauge into its mouth and pulling both triggers in a hurry. It's actually a one-kill boss, but you have to get over your own fear to just drive into this thing, take the fight to it, and be able to do it within seconds. If you're not willing to do that, you're in for a real disappointing time.
Yeah. I never thought of it that way, of kind of forcing you to get over your own fear of that one-hit KO. That's really interesting. It is a cool bit of foreshadowing, a cool bit of environmental storytelling here. I liked it a lot. It wasn't immediately apparent to me that that's what it was doing until, I was probably honestly halfway through the fight. But after you defeat this lizard, Harry is going to black out. Harry blacks out quite a bit during this game, usually when sirens are blaring. I don't know if there's a connection there, but while you're blacked out, you see for the first time hallucinations of this strange woman with some amazing dialogue from Harry. What was that? Who the hell was that? Just back to back. It's great.
Huh? What was that? Who in the hell was that?
And when you wake up, you are inexplicably out of that alternate reality, and you go to this church because the church bell is clanging, so of course we go there. And this is where we meet another new recurring character who does not introduce herself just yet. She's in a church, and she is speaking very cryptically. She said that Harry's coming here was foretold by gyromancy, and she knows that Harry is looking for Cheryl, despite being a stranger. And she tells Harry to walk the path of the hermit concealed by Flauros. Flauros here is this triangular pyramid device, which she calls a cage of peace that will illuminate the path. I didn't know this prior, but if you are privy to mythology or particularly some of the Jewish religion mythology, Flauros is a demon. Particularly a strong great duke of hell having 36 legions of demons under his rule. He gives true answers of all things past, present, and future, but he must be first commanded to enter a magic triangle, for if not, he will lie, deceive the conjurer, and beguile him in other business. He's a bad news. So if you know that going in, you might have a hunch that maybe this stranger is not telling the truth.
Yeah, this is a game where the developers really relied a lot on sort of like Jewish Kabbalist, mythology, the Talmud, and a lot of New Age thought. Now, obviously, we know what a huckster is in day to day. If you watch, one of those TV psychics, they do a thing called a cold read, where they begin naming random shit until they realize that one of the person in the audience has had a reaction. Then they narrow it down until they finally, is there anyone who recently had a family member who died whose name starts with R? Oh, Mabel, your cousin, what was his name? Richard. Richard died recently. Fucking, yeah, this is bullshit line. But there's a lot of mysticism. There's a lot of things people believe. And we here in the West, because we're so inundated with Christianity, there's not a lot of outright spoken mysticism in Christianity as per se. It's more like under the table, we don't really talk about this too much, that sort of thing. But if you begin to poke around, there's a lot of like basis and thought for this. What I think a lot of people don't understand, and I'm no expert because obviously I'm not Jewish. I don't, speak for the Jewish people. I don't understand the religion. But what I do know of it is that the Old Testament of the Christian Bible is all the books of the Torah, the first half of the Jewish Bible. The second half, the Talmud, we don't know in Christianity and we don't talk about in Western society. But the Talmud is where things like the great angel Metatron come from, and a lot of those other bizarre demons in hell, and how things like, angels are actually like giant clouds of eyeballs with 6 flaming wings and stuff like that. And Michael with the flaming sword doesn't stand out too much. He's pretty much mundane. And if you don't really know and look at this stuff, and gyromancy being, obviously some level of earth magic or whatnot, it also kind of doesn't make sense why King Solomon was allowed to be God's only like licensed magician and he had everyone else like kill a witch, because in the Talmud, witches are a genuine problem, and God has had more magicians. He's let more of them go. Their sole job has been to defeat the demons of hell, the fallen angels, the Nephilim, all of these great boogeymen of the Bible that we get a lot of our like mythical monsters from. And even I was a younger man playing this, and I had Flauros. What the hell is a Flauros? But the more you poke around, and it becomes much later, you'll begin seeing sigils, and you'll find one in the school. There's some kind of titanic seal in the midst of the school courtyard that is later linked to one of the fallen angels, I believe Samael.
Yeah, and Samael in particular oftentimes gets conflated, and sometimes, depending on what book you're reading, is the same as Satan, the fallen angel, Lucifer.
And I mean, Lucifer, the concept of the shaitan is borrowed that would eventually become Satan. And as I watched the YouTuber say this, it's like some point they kind of jokingly said a lot of this stuff is like DLC for the Bible. And like you never know who actually wrote it and who was responsible. And then people conflating things written in, that were written in Paradise Lost with things that happened in the Bible, and you don't really it gets all over the place. But mysticism in Christianity is what we're used to, is heretical thought. Obviously, it is not okay. We know that in some of the Vatican archives, there are books hidden away which were side thoughts and other people who wrote other books of the Bible post, the death of Christ, who are considered heretical, that might have also led to, God's actually okay with magic. He's given people the ability, but it has to be used specifically to fight certain demons. And if you do it wrong, you become one. And this is where the stuff gets really sort of intertwined with what Harry is trying to figure out, because on the surface level, let's be honest, none of this makes sense. You're a dude who got bumped over the head, you've been wandering around town, God knows what you're hallucinating, and now you've got a crazy woman telling you to go, follow the path of gyromancy to find your daughter. I'd have walked, I'd have left by then if it were me personally. I'd have let the feds handle it.
Exactly. But at the same time, what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
After this scene, she'll tell you, this woman, to go to the hospital before it's too late. She refuses to elaborate. This is going to take us into a new area of town. We're going to see new enemies here called monkey men. I don't think that's what they're called, but it's kind of what they are. They're dangerous.
Yeah, they're like gorilla lizards. It's weird.
On the way there, I think this might be optional, but on the way there, you can start to find memos that are indicating a side plot that's going on, that there was a local drug ring in this town a while back, that it was always a problem. They never got it under control. People were shuffling drugs all around. So keep that in your back pocket. But for now, We get to the hospital, and we hear a gunshot, and this is going to be from another gentleman named Dr. Michael Kaufman. He shoots at you, and you're like, hey, settle down, fella. So Kaufman, this is getting a little suspicious. Kaufman was just taking a nap in the staff room, and when he woke up, this was all going on. He has no idea what's going on, who your daughter is, where she's at, whatever. It seems like he is just another guy that is stuck in this. He doesn't seem like he's panicking. He's just another guy. He leaves. He says he can't just sit around doing nothing. He is crucial to gaining either the good or the good plus ending, which I don't know that I would have done had I not been using a guide. I don't think I would have picked up on that. But I also think that was their intention. They wanted you to replay it. This will bring us into the hospital, which is probably my favorite area in this game. I love the hospital.
Yeah, the hospital is really kind of, at least for Silent Hills 1 and 2, the concept of the hospital setting will have some level of definition. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything for the second game, but how they handle the enemy of the nurse. And it's not often that Silent Hill repeats an enemy, but it repeats the nurse across both games for different reasons. In Harry's case, he doesn't really understand why he's getting attacked by this nursing staff, but if you look very closely at their character model, they have on their backs, because they're all hunched over when they come to attack, they have this massive pulsating cancer that is part of their design, and when you kill them, the cancer finally deflates like a balloon. It's really kind of not explained what that does. Whereas the nurses in Silent Hill 2 sort of stagger on like supermodels with massively exposed cleavage, which was more for, the concept of, the character of that game and why he viewed them that way. In Harry's case, they are haggard, they are bent over, they are claw-like, they are creepers, and they have this strange growth, which will come into play a little bit later on in the story. But the hospital really begins to unravel some of the secrets as to another character that has been, again, only experienced in visions, and why you're doing this.
Yeah. We're going to get to those nurses and doctors a little bit later. For now, all you need to know is all of them are like that. There are no normal nurses or doctors here. I guess aside from Dr. Kaufman, who we only know as a doctor through name. He's just wearing a suit.
The doctor with the Glock. Yeah. Great plan, Doc.
Right. This hospital is where a lot of my favorite music tracks come in too. Just the really industrial, aggressive, weaponized, like you had said previously. And as we're wandering around, we're also finding more information about this character named Alessa. That is the spooky woman that walked in front of our car. That is the woman that we saw an apparition of when we blacked out last time. She is somehow connected to all this. We don't know anything more about her other than her name, though. But, we're meeting all these characters right in a row because we're about to meet another. We find another human here, a nurse, a normal nurse, not a possessed nurse, we'll say. She is named Lisa, and she is just so thrilled to see you. She's so scared. She has no idea what's going on. She says she got knocked out, and when she came to, this was a nightmare world. Harry's going to ask her, do you know what's all up with this weird shit in the basement? Have you been down there? And she'll say, no, we're under strict orders not to go down there. She doesn't know anything, which will be important later. Before Harry can, explain what he saw, we hear those sirens again, and he passes out. So Harry passes out here, and when he wakes up, we speak again to the older woman we saw in the church, who introduces herself as Dahlia Gillespie. That is her name. She says that this town is being devoured by a darkness, and that she has foreseen all of this. And Harry at varying points will be like, what are you talking about? And she just won't tell him straight up because this is drama. She has to speak cryptically. Dahlia will tell us that everything is beyond her power now, and she tells us to go to the other church in town. And this is also where we learn about the mark of Samael. We had already talked about Samael, so we don't necessarily need to talk again. Long story short, we're dealing with the devil. Also, when I was researching Samael for this, just to see, are we dealing with Christian, Jewish. What is this? This is probably the interpretation of Samael from like the Book of Enoch or the Talmud, like you were talking about before, Phil. But when I was searching Samael, one of the entries that comes up is a page for him on the villain wiki, which is just a wiki full of villains. And that got a really big laugh out of me, that there is a mythological being in the villain wiki alongside, who's a villain? I can't think of a villain.
Samael, Severus Snape, Megatron, they're all there.
Walter White,
Walter White, yeah. In the big cultural list of villains.
It's very funny. Very funny. Yeah, we're dealing with the devil. That's something that's going to come into play pretty soon.
Yeah, there are easy allusions in this game where you could think, again, there's a subgenre in horror movies that is religious horror. A lot of movies involving possession, whatnot, The Exorcist being only the most famous of them. But anytime you begin realizing where you're in a game or in a setting or a book or movie where the ultimate bad guy may in fact be Satan, the devil himself, things can go bad real goddamn fast.
Oh, yeah. And, it's I don't want to demean it at all, but it's easy if you want to make people afraid. Just say the devil, just say Satan and people freak out.
Oh, absolutely.
Another thing, I don't know that we need to say this, but, Silent Hill 2 is coming up. That game has a lot more to analyze and to really dig into interpretations of. Silent Hill 1's not really like that. I mean, it's really just driven by the events of the plot and the lore. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these references are kind of just for purposes of moving the plot forward. Like I don't want to say it's not that deep, because there's conversation to be had here, and we've delved into it. What it means that the radio static is so dissonant, and how the environments are working with the story. It's not that it's not deep. It's just that there's not as much there. There's not a lot of psychology or philosophy to dig into here. Mm-hmm. There's just references. Apologies, but this is definitely plot heavy,
Yeah, absolutely. And I will, like I said, with the sequel coming up, that's a lot more a game you can sort of dig into the psychology of, because it's a psychology-driven game. Whereas Silent Hill 1 becomes, really more of a hallucinatory religious horror game at the end of it.
Right. And that, I'll be honest, that doesn't always work for me. Cults and so forth. Not always. It's not always a slam dunk for me. I'm not always into it. We'll talk more about the effectiveness when we get through it.
Absolutely.
We're going to bump into Sybil again. She just happened to find us. She didn't leave town. She followed us here. How long has she been following us? Who knows? But she followed us here. And she says that she saw Cheryl. She was walking on Bachman Road toward this local lake, but the weird thing is that road is closed off, and she seemed to be walking on air or on water, just not something a human being should be able to do. This is also the first time, if you missed it before, where drugs come up. You explain to Sybil who Dahlia is and what was going on, and Sybil says, "Oh, she must have been on drugs or something," which, one, is very funny, just a very curt delivery of that. But two, that's where they introduce, there's actually, this town had a big drug problem. It's this drug called PVT, or PTV. And it has strong hallucinogenic properties and was very popular in two respects. One, locals would sell it to tourists, and it would, make illegal drug money. But two, it was very popular with the town cult. There was a population that really was into this queer old religion, as I think Sybil calls it. And they used that for their rituals.
Yeah, this is you're starting to get like Manson family vibes in the background where, very similar. Somebody was running the show, and part and parcel with it was, let's do acid, let's get high, and then we'll plan really horrific shit. And that's kind of where this cult is coming in. It's more of that, we're going to get high. Yeah, we'll sell some to the normies and the tourists and make some money, keep us going. But we're going to get high, and we're going to make a plan. Oh man, is this going to be a plan? And it's going to involve the devil. And oh man, this is going to be the greatest plan ever.
This is all going to tie together towards the end, although some of it is a little more vague and ambiguous than other aspects. But I think we'll be able to parse it out. Harry is going to pass out again here. He passes out while exploring this hidden altar room. And what's weird here is that Sybil will come in to check on him and he's gone. So presumably Harry gets transported or has the ability to, which I haven't thought about it. I think it's just one of those, like, if it was explained, it would kind of hurt the overall plot. So just don't think about it.
Right.
But when he wakes up, he's back in, I think it's the hospital, sitting with Lisa again. And it turns out Lisa knows Dahlia. She says that she's famous around these parts. And the word around town is that she had gone crazy after her child died in a fire a few years ago. She also goes on, Lisa does, to explain what she thinks Dahlia meant about the town darkness. And this is where we learn about the queer old religion, and there was a cult that was doing hallucinogenics. The long and the short of it is this town has a history, and it's being covered up. And the way that Lisa says it is everyone clammed up about it whenever new folks came into the town. Something that I noted here is that even after rewatching this scene, I'm not really sure why Lisa is saying what she's saying. Did the young people moving away, was that a bad thing? Why was everybody clamming up? And what were they clamming up about? Like, this feels very, maybe it's just poor localization, but it felt kind of directionless. I wasn't sure why she was saying some of the things she was saying.
Yeah, I don't know. It helps in some places explain, like, a real sort of, like, the town has a history of violence. But it's a tourist town, so we don't want to fuck up our revenue. So let's, like, not talk to the locals about it. But they kind of got the idea. And again, if you've ever grown up in a small town, the problem is there's not a lot of opportunities. So of course the young people are going to move away. But those who stay behind and those who've already always lived there tend to get very bitter and angry that nobody stays, or when everyone leaves, they never come back. They don't bring their wealth with them. And that's kind of the idea. What she was saying about Silent Hill is, like, the young would move away. They wouldn't bring, they wouldn't bring the wealth back. There was a brain drain. There was a ability drain. But at the same time, they didn't proselytize this religion that was in the background of the town. And that angered them further, which would spur them to do kind of what they did. Now, again, maybe a localization issue. It does have a bit of a directionless vibe. I think the reality is it was trying to plug some plot holes that the player might have already been thinking, or be able to, sort of egg the player along to where to investigate next. I mean, Harry passes out more than guys with the average head injury. And passing out in a plot of a story is never a good thing to do. You're really supposed to do it once or twice and move things along. After that, it becomes a bad trope. And it's like, oh, okay, this is just terrible. The author doesn't know what they're doing. But this is, and as you bring up, the concept suddenly becomes, has Harry really been hallucinating, or is he honestly being transported to a dark world? Because it seems like when Sybil comes to check on him and he's disappeared. But if you think about it, this becomes significant to Sybil later on, because she goes dark for a while after this too. We don't meet her for a while after this until two significant things, and possibly one more, which we'll get to at some point. Yeah, it's kind of aimless, but at the same time, it feels like, even me, like, sort of playing it, realized that it felt like the developers were stuck. They had already had A plot, which is Satan incarnate, and they had B plot, which is drugs. Drugs are bad. We got a drug cult. And now are like, do they really tie together? They're trying to overlap them. They're trying to marry them together. And it's a marriage of inconvenience in some ways.
You had mentioned that Harry blacks out more than the average person with a brain injury. Well, he's doing it again. He blacks out here. We wake up in the alternate version of the hospital. And like you were just getting at, Harry is now no longer sure what is real and what is not. He begins doubting his own senses too. Like, maybe none of this is real. But we only have one lead. and that is that Sybil said that Cheryl was sort of walking towards the lake, but we don't know how to get there because Bachman Road is shut down. So we think, well, maybe if we find Lisa again, we can figure out what's going on. And we do. We do end up finding Lisa again. She tells us that there is an underground tunnel near the waterworks where she used to work, and that sounds like that'll get us right underground across to the lake. But she begs us, she says, don't go. Really, please don't go. She's terrified of being alone. So we say, well, come with us, just go together. I'll protect you. But she refuses. She says, I can't help but feel like I shouldn't leave this place. So this goes back to what you were saying, Phil. I mean, we only see her at the hospital, and she won't leave.
And the hospital's not a safe place. I mean, the possessed are wandering the halls. She is basically bundled up in a room, and every time we see her, it's the same room. And she alludes to, of course, not going in the basement. And I think at one point we get a very fuzzy tape that somewhere in the hospital that's, claiming something. It's hard to make out about, why, they're doing this to a child. Why won't they die? Very crazy stuff. But no, she strangely refuses. She remembers the elementary school. She says, go to the waterworks. But she refuses to leave the hospital at any point. And it's not because she feels safe. She's scared. At this point, in retrospect, should be raising every alarm bell that you have that something isn't going right here. Not that we love escort missions in games. We generally don't. But things have already gone bad. Things are getting strange. And if your alarms aren't raising at this point, that something is wrong, I would recommend that maybe you get yourself checked out, because they should be. Now, unfortunately, this waterworks leads us into a next section, which is our obligatory sewer levels.
Yeah, it sure is. I literally wrote in my notes that I don't really have a lot to say about this. It is just the sewers.
There's like weird little reptile men that may be like alligators. I don't really know. But by that point, you had...
I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. That's one thing about the sewers is your radio doesn't work down here. So the static is not going to help you.
Yes, it does not help you. It is a flashlight only scenario, but by this point you have the hammer.
Yes. These things are pretty quick down here, so maybe don't choose to fight all of them, but it's just serving to get you from point A to point B. There's not a lot going on down here.
It's definitely the weakest area of the game. There's nothing even like really lore-wise that connects it. It's just like they needed a point A to point B. They wanted to have a monster, and they're never really seen again. I feel in some cases it's almost like the developer is sort of doing a learn-as-you-go sort of thing, and it's one of those ugly outgrowths of survival horror where there's always going to be a weird dead area with something that doesn't make a lot of sense, and we all kind of glossed over it and kept going.
Yeah, I can see that. I think you're right. Once you're out of here, once you're out of the sewers, you're into the resort area, there is an important side quest that you can do that will determine whether you get a good ending or a bad ending, and it involves Michael Kaufman. So let's talk about this. I don't think I would have got this if I weren't using a guide. I'll be totally honest with you. In Bird's Eye View, it involves you first saving Kaufman. You walk into a bar and he's getting attacked by a demon. You save him. And this leads you find this little receipt that he has. And on the receipt, you get a combination to a lock. And this leads off a series of finding different keys and locations that ultimately you find this vial of red mystery liquid that is stuffed in a motorcycle gas can on the motorcycle, clearly being hidden. Yeah, very clearly being hidden on purpose. And Kaufman will see you, he'll find you grabbing it, and he gets pissed. He gets really, really angry. And he comes in and he's saying, "What are you doing with that? Give that back to me. Get the hell out of here. Mind your own business." And then he leaves. That completes the side quest. That's done. And that will let you get either the good or the good plus ending. It doesn't elaborate exactly on what this is right now. And depending on how you play the game, you might never exactly learn what this is. But this is going to be crucial because Michael Kaufman is not just a doctor. He is involved in the local drug trade.
Absolutely. He is, not only is he a doctor, he's like the main chemist that's like supplying the drugs and making the hallucinogen and whatnot. And this is a bizarre side quest again. I played this too with a guide back in the day, and they made very clear in the guide, really follow this path if you want the good ending. So it means that it's not Harry alone getting attacked. Other citizens are getting attacked by these demons too. Now, Kaufman, I don't feel bad about because he's kind of an asshole every single time you meet him. He has shot at you more than once at this point, on quote unquote accident. But the truth is, yeah, you go on this wild side quest, finding keys and finding a receipt with a combination that leads you to a motel that the doctor was staying at. Yeah, for some reason, the local doctor doesn't have a house in Silent Hill. He lives out of a one-bedroom motel. I'm not going to have any arguments. Whatever. I didn't make the damn game. But yeah, this is a weird one because you have to like inspect the motorcycle, and for some reason Harry decides to open the gas tank, in which he finds this mystery vial of red liquid. I think you also have to scoop something up from the hospital that's a red liquid too. You'll have this with you. The doctor does see you. He gets very, very mad. It's because this red liquid is more than just, a bottle of Gatorade. It is, and I'm just going to kind of say it now, it is basically the counteragent to the hallucinogen or the drug. And he keeps it basically to blackmail the cult by saying, I can end this anytime I want because guess what I mixed up? The fucking antidote. So y'all better keep me on retainer and y'all better do what I say.
Yeah, I don't remember if I picked up on that just by playing the game.
Mm-hmm. No, you kind of have to dig around in some of the lore for this. It's not well said. At some point in the game, if you find the note, it'll explain the basis of what the hallucinogen is. But not only is this the counteragent, it also is responsible for being able to save someone who's possessed. It's very bizarre. It's a weird multi-faction, faceted red liquid multi-purpose thing. But basically, that's why he has it. He has it as a backup emergency plan and blackmail.
That's so interesting. He is, you might not expect it on a first playthrough, but he is integral to all of the goings on here. And he even has a relationship in the broadest sense, not a romantic one. He has a relationship with Lisa. We don't know it yet.
And it's a very unhealthy relationship.
Oh yeah. We're going to run into Sybil and Dahlia Gillespie once more here. It's largely the same as before. Dahlia is just speaking very cryptically, telling us where to go. Sybil is going to help us look. And we split up for the first time here, which becomes important. We go to the lighthouse, Harry does. There are spiral stairs here in a tank control game, which feels like the only objectively wrong thing they could have possibly done. And they did it. I laughed out loud when I got here, but you don't find anything there. You find a giant marking of Samael and an apparition of Alessa, but nothing else happens. You just decide to turn around and leave to look for Sybil. And when you find her, at some point when you two split up, it's not clear when, she got taken over by a parasite. It's actually the cinematography of this whole section is pretty cool. She sort of gets up out of the shadows on the merry-go-round and lurches towards you clumsily with red eyes. And this begins a fight. And you can either save her or kill her. If you try to kill her, which is what I wager to guess most people will do on their first playthrough, she has a gun, so she's not easy to fight because she'll shoot you. But the way to save her is that red liquid that you were just talking about, Phil, with Kaufman. You mentioned that we found some in the hospital ways back. That's true. We did. We could scoop some of it up. And if you use that on Sybil, the parasite kind of reacts very harshly to it, and Sybil will fall, and the parasite crawls out of her. It's this little, like a giant slug-looking thing. It's like something out of Animorphs or something.
Slug fetus, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And Harry stomps it.
Years later, in PT, fetus in the sink. Silent Hill 1, slug fetus coming out of Sybil. It all comes back around, man. It's a conspiracy.
We'll never get it. We'll never know. It's a shame.
But you're right. This is a sort of a mid to end game portion. And a lot of survival horror games really, even the best of the best, struggle in the mid game. Because in a lot of cases, they have a really strong opening, they have a strong closer, but like so many pieces of media, we need to get from point A to point B, and the middle oftentimes falls apart or has struggles through. But some of the cinematography, like you said, in this area is great. The lighthouse, despite the tank controls, it is literally shown Harry ascending through the lighthouse. It's very symbolic as you go up the staircase. The cinematography for this is beautiful, especially for a 3D polygonal game from '99. Just ascending those old rusty stairs into the top of the lighthouse. And this has got to be the broadest fucking lighthouse I've ever seen, because you get to the top, there's no actual light. You're standing out there on a large deck, and the ghost of Alessa is doing yet another seal to Samael, which will sort of be explained towards the end, but not well, when there's a third one that crops up. But he decides, okay, Cheryl's not here. We look at the lighthouse. Why would a 7-year-old go to a lighthouse? I don't have any fucking idea. Let's look at the lighthouse anyway. We need to kill time. Well, Sybil goes to the amusement park, which obviously would think would draw a little child more. Place where there's fun, games, snacks, going to the amusement park. By the time you reach there, you've already entered the dark world, so you're not seeing the normal Silent Hill park. You're seeing their rusted industrial fencing for floors, grating, everything's falling apart. You're looking at these disturbed, versions of the carnival that are bloody or falling apart or rusted or disgusting and moldy and overgrown, until you reach the merry-go-round. And like you said, this is where the Sybil fight begins. Sybil is seated in a wheelchair. She is now somehow possessed. She wasn't when you split up, which means something must have happened when she went in the same direction as Dahlia, and she begins lurching towards you with red eyes. Now, if you run around the merry-go-round to get away from her, the merry-go-round does move. So sometimes she will actually be seated on one of the merry-go-round horses and just casually rides up to you, slides off the horse, and continues the fight. What you can do if you have the red goo on you, you can hurl it on her, as you said, and the parasite comes out. This is pretty critical. You have a certain point of the game which you can fuck this up, because if you shoot her enough times and don't throw the goo fast enough, you'll still kill her, which will lead to one of the bad endings, or the not as good ending. You're supposed to, at least the guide I had at the time said, shoot her like 3 or 4 times and then just keep getting close with the thing and just trying to go into the menu and say use under the red stuff until Harry uses it. Well, the truth is, as I watched somebody replay this, you don't have to fire a single shot at her. You just have to play for enough time that when she gets close, you hit use on it and Harry will just pull the stuff out and splash her with it. Yeah,
I literally just ran right up to her and did it.
And doused it. Yeah, so even the guide I had was not 100% correct. However, if you do shoot her, she won't be any worse for the wear. This little strange possessing feet will still come out. This is sort of the same possessor fetus that is running the nurses. So, is it the devil? Is it related to a side effect of the drug? It's not really clear, and it never will be clear. But it has something related to the cult in some way. And again, the red goo being both the antidote and the backup plan. That's kind of, this opportunity gives you, okay, well, now Sybil's in for the best ultimate ending. If she's not, you can still get one of the good ones, but you have to be very sort of picky about how you handle the end.
Right, exactly. You are right, the parasites never really get explained. I think this is the only Silent Hill game they actually appear in as well, whereas, the other enemies and nurses and etc., they'll be back for more of them. After that, if you save Sybil, you get another scene here of the two of them talking, and the camera is just stationary in the middle of the merry-go-round just watching horses go by. It's really cool. But Harry will info dump a little bit, and he says he'll tell Sybil that Cheryl isn't his biological daughter. They just found her on the side of the road, which I swear to God, that's what he says.
He does. Mystery roadside baby.
They just took her in. Him and his wife, who by the way, I don't remember if we said, it's not like critical to know this, but she died. His wife died like 3 or 7 months before this whole game started. But yeah, she's not biological, and he's like, but she has to have something to do with all of this.
As they say early in the game, none of this would have happened except they were watching TV. Cheryl saw an ad, a little 7-year-old, saw an ad for Silent Hill, a small resort town in somewhere America, and said, Daddy, I want to go to Silent Hill, and I want to go now. Harry just went, sure, we'll go there.
Wait, do they say this in the game? Do they say it was her idea?
Yes, they actually say it was Cheryl's idea. She saw an ad for Silent Hill, and she wanted to go. Silent Hill is a small town with a lake and a carnival. Not really something that a 7-year-old would be interested in, but Harry kind of thinks it's great daddy-daughter time, and it kind of then begins to realize, wait a minute, they adopted Cheryl they found on a roadside near the town of Silent Hill 7 years ago. Problem. Massive problem.
Yeah, there is a reason that Cheryl did ask. I just could not remember if the game told me or if I just read it on the wiki. But
it's glossed over very quick.
I gotcha. We are approaching very rapidly the very end, so let's get into these last few moments. You're going to run into Alessa shortly after this encounter, and Harry at this point he doesn't care what's going on. He just wants Cheryl back. Alessa uses force powers, like from Star Wars, and pushes him down. And then the Flaros just sort of floats out of Harry's pocket into the air. It's a little unclear what goes on, but it attacks Alessa in some way. And then Dahlia walks in. And this is where we get some context into who she really is. She is Alessa's mom. And it's unclear right at this moment, but it seems that Alessa tried to escape from her. A weird light begins to engulf them, and once again, Harry blacks out, and we wake up with Lisa. We're going to do some exploring like in the middle of this conversation, but the gist of this all is that Lisa is gaining her memories back. She says, like, I realize what's going on now. I know why this is all so familiar to me. It's because I've been here before. And she realizes that she's actually dead, just like all of the other nurses and doctors in this hospital, who, remember, are taken over by the parasite. This is a really cool concept that horror uses a lot, this idea of what happens when the dead realize that they're truly dead. And here the answer is, well, they become that then. I can't remember if this was in this game or if it was in the novel or in other games, but Lisa was working directly under Dr. Kaufman, taking care of Alessa after an incident that happens with Alessa, after the house fire that we heard about, the rumors with Dahlia. Lisa was in charge of taking care of Alessa, and Kaufman wanted only her to do that and for her to keep everything under wraps, and he ends up getting her hooked on PTV to keep her obedient. And you can find this in her diary, too, that she talks about being hooked on the drug, and she wants to get out of here, but she can't. She's going through withdrawal. But once she explains this, once she has this realization, she asks Harry for help. And she begins to sob, and Harry kind of pushes her away because she begins to bleed out of every orifice. Her nose, her eyes, eventually her skin just starts pouring blood. And, it's a tragic scene. This is maybe my favorite scene in the game. She's sobbing, just begging for help. She's a victim in all of this. But she is just so bloodied and broken, and Harry freaks out. Like, this is maybe the first time his emotions get the better of him. He freaks out, and he runs out of the room. He closes and locks the door, and, music plays out as Lisa is banging and sobbing. if you try to go back in, she's gone. And that's actually how you can read her diary. So really, really intense scene that, really she's a tragic character. I mean, she's not a monster like maybe Harry is seeing her as. It's really sad.
Yeah, this is at this point in the game, we are rocketing towards the ending at this point. And there's some major lore dump at this point that really kind of explains everything. Do you mind if I talk about it somewhat?
That's literally the next thing in the notes. So yeah, if you wanna go talk about it.
Well, I'm gonna rewind a second back to the post Carnival Ride Sybil fight, where Harry encounters the spirit of Alessa. Now, up until this point, Alessa has been more seen Harry and not done anything, but we're getting the idea that Alessa is beginning to see Harry as he uncovers more. Harry might be an enemy. So that's how Alessa knocks him down, because he's been working with Dahlia. So she's beginning to see him as an enemy, and she's actually in the process of trying to do the third and final seal to Samael that would basically lock her and the town off from whatever's about to happen to her. Well, Dahlia has strange cult powers. Harry passes out again. He wakes up in the realm. Simply know, if you check your save file, it will just say nowhere. So the last little bit of the game is in nowhere, which starts out back at Alchemilla Hospital for the last time, and takes us into these corridors upon rusted hell, in which you will be attempting to unlock doors based on keys named after spiritual forces, both good and evil, within Kabbalist, mythology. You'll begin collecting sigils that are important to just about every major world religion except Christianity to unlock a door to get to the final fight. But they dump a huge, the whole, why are we here? What the fuck is going on? Why are we doing this? Well, as you said, Lisa Garland was Alessa's nurse. Alessa is Dahlia's daughter. Because of something that happens, the fire, Lisa is put on by Dr. Kaufman, second in command of the cult. Once Lisa gets her hooked on it, and all the stuff Lisa's talking about, including that VHS tape that was fuzzy, was Lisa's confessional. She didn't understand why the child she was watching was suffering. There are burns all over her body. She's not dying long after she should have. Like, literally, the walls are beginning to run with blood and pus. What the hell is going on? I want to get out of here. I can't. I'm trapped. Dear God, what's going to happen to me? The house fire was not accidental. The cult's plan all along, ladies and gentlemen, Satan is real, and they plan to impregnate Alessa, who, mind you, is about somewhere between 10 and 14, with Satan. Dahlia's plan is to bring the devil into the world through her child daughter, and that is going to be Satan's baby when it's born. And they will have to kill Alessa to make it stick. Alessa knows this is coming, so she tries to burn down the entire house with her and the demon baby inside of her to destroy it all, but Dahlia and Kaufman stop it. And now she is pregnant, expected to carry to term, with 95 to 99% third to fourth degree burns all over her body. And of course, Satan won't let her die, because one of his kids is on the way. This drug was to keep everyone involved, active, and running the cult until the time of the arrival of the devil, in which the end of the world will come. To stop this, Alessa's power, she is actually latently psychic. And to sort of make sure that she can't actually give birth because she will be technically dead, she splits her soul into Alessa, who cannot do anything, and an infant that will become known as Cheryl, that will be picked up by a man and his wife who just happen to be driving by Silent Hill when all this is going down. And they will raise this little girl. And the problem is, by total accident, little Alessa's half-soul Cheryl saw an ad for Silent Hill and wanted to go home.
Yeah, exactly. She wanted to go home. That's why. At that point, Alessa was being kept alive partly by Samael, but also Dahlia was sort of performing these rituals to keep her lucid. And eventually,
And
Alessa
suffering.
Yeah, exactly. And eventually, Alessa just couldn't take it anymore. So she wanted to reunite these two parts of herself to end her own life to just foil this plan. So it's kind of hinted at that Cheryl suggesting going to Silent Hill was due to the influence of Alessa. Alessa used her powers somehow to astral project onto the highway and cause the accident once they were close enough to the town. And the coolest part, I think, everything about this town, the monsters, the fog, everything is all caused by Alessa. It's because of her own fears and insecurities.
Yep.
She was afraid of dogs in life. We get the hellhounds. She was picked on and bullied at school. We get the ghost children. It's all exactly like the only thing that's not directly tied to her own fears and insecurities are the parasites. You know, the nurses and the doctors being controlled by the parasites.
But even still, medical staff bringing her pain translated into these haggard and disgusting possessed nurses.
Exactly so. I think this justification being diegetic like that is so fascinating. It is, and this is setting up sort of the world we go into, and well, not literally, this isn't a direct sequel, but it sets up this aesthetic, this notion that we get in Silent Hill 2, where we're really delving into the mind of somebody, and that's causing things that we see. We're not going to spoil Silent Hill 2. But,
no, but it is interesting because all of the monsters we see are based on Alessa's fear and pain, not Harry. As of Silent 2 and Hill 2 and going forward, all of the monsters are based on the protagonist's fears and pain. But it definitely, Silent Hill 1 sets up that entire aesthetic for the remainder of the series. It is the hallmark game that gives us those sequels that really impacted us culturally.
Yeah. So we covered a lot of scenes and flashbacks and memos just talking about Alessa's backstory. I don't remember how much of that is explicitly said in game and how much I gleaned from the wiki to write it down. It might be a mix of both.
Some of it is explained, some of it is read in diary, some is found in materials that if you don't notice it in the environment and go backtracking a little bit, you may miss, because unfortunately, all the time you're finding this, you're still in nowhere. And there are 3 floors of part of a hospital, part of nowhere, that are all overlapping on each other. And this is unfortunately the part of the game towards the end where, especially if you have a normal to hard, you need a guide, because this is where the puzzles become incredibly obtuse. And this is right before the final fight. And if you cannot figure out the puzzles, it is a dead stop for the end of the game.
Yeah. I could see this last section causing some frustration. There's also a potential to get instantly killed here if you fail one of the puzzles.
Yeah, it's not clearly explained, and it's sort of a hilarious death. It really is. He gets eaten by a fridge.
Basically, yeah, that's functionally what happens. That is not explained at all. I did this on purpose just to see what happened, and like if I didn't have a save state, I would have raged. I would have been so mad.
Yeah, it's a fun thing, but at some point in nowhere, you walk into a room, it's a kitchen, there's a giant industrial refrigerator there that has a dagger jammed in the doors. And if you look at it, it says there's 2 parts of a chain that have been unlocked. And the game just says, do you want to take the dagger? If you do, it's one of the 5 religious symbols you need. It's called the Dagger of Melchior, as in one of the 3 wise men that brings the gifts to Jesus. But why he would have a dagger? Well, a lot of people were armed back then. Are we using it in place of the crucifix for Catholicism or Christianity? Probably. Because again, if it goes to America and we see a cross out of context other than, clapping and playing guitar in a church, people get really upset. But the Star of David was fine. That was in the game. An Ankh was there. The Egyptians might have a problem with that. But yeah, back to the fridge. You take the dagger out, and if you don't use another puzzle item that makes no sense to close that chain back up, Harry gets like 2 steps, turns around, the fridge doors open, and some tentacled beast drags him into the netherworld, and he gets eaten by a fridge.
Yep. It is pretty funny if it happens. If you know it's going to happen, it's pretty funny. Okay, so we're going into the end game at this point. For just for the sake of ease, we're going to assume that the good plus ending is what we're getting, but we'll touch on the other ones, including the joke ending. Harry comes face to face with Dahlia and Alessa, both parts of Alessa, the burnt half a corpse, and Cheryl, quote unquote, who now fully resembles Alessa. Sybil is up here too. She's incapacitated, but she's up here. This was Dahlia's plan all along, to get these two halves reunited and birth their new god. The Floros was not actually a cage of peace. It was to weaken Alessa so she couldn't end her own life to prevent this plan. The two Alessas merge here and create a sort of deified-looking character, an angel known as the Incubator. Now, if you're doing the bad route, the Incubator is going to be your final boss. But we're not doing that here because Kaufman comes in out of nowhere. He shoots Dahlia. He pulls out the vial of red liquid, says, "You're easy." And then he, in a very, very, very drawn out and very out of place slow-mo shot, like from an action movie, he throws the red vial at Alessa, the Incubator. This drives out the Incubus, which is a demon that is like kind of lightly modeled after Baphomet, comes out of Alessa, and that is our final boss. It immediately kills Dahlia with like lightning. This boss can also like one-shot kill you, kind of. His one attack, he does 3 lightning strikes in a row. And like if you get hit by all 3, I'm pretty sure you're done. You have to like pause it while he's hitting you to heal. It's very, very strange. I don't like this boss at all. It felt too hard to me.
This is again, just to let you know, Coffin doesn't get out of this. As after he somehow tosses this liquid, that's when Dead Lisa shows up and drags him back under the surface of whatever the nowhere land is beneath the wire mesh. And that's the last we see of either of them. This boss is the boss of the game where at some point in the game you will get your rifle. If you have been judicious and saved all of your ammo, now is the time to unload absolutely everything you have. However, the problem is with this boss, when you are targeting him, because none of your melee weapons will reach, your handgun is too weak and the shotgun needs to be closer, he's half the time honestly off screen. So you kind of almost have to control your aim. You can't free aim and walk. You have to actually like track aim, stand still, and just keep pulling the trigger and fire as fast as you can. Because if he hits you with that lightning, one bolt splits into 3 and it will auto kill you. Unless, like you said, you somewhere in the middle of it, you hit the pause button, open up your supplies, and heal. And we didn't mention the healing comes in 3 flavors in Silent Hill. Like kombucha-style health drinks, first aid kits, and things called ampules that just, look like a weird jar that are the strongest of the 3. And you only get a couple of them, but they are a full heal from practically dead to fresh as a daisy. And you really want to save your ampules for this end fight. This is the joke we always made in RPGs where everyone saves the elixirs to the end and never uses them. Now you want to use them. You absolutely want to use them. And your rifle. That's going to be the thing that gets you through the end of this nightmare.
Yeah, it really is that difficult. And ampules are not exactly plentiful in this world. You're only going to have, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 probably.
Yeah, I think max you get like 4 across the whole game.
Yeah, not a lot. So you want to make sure that you have these and ideally some other med kits, kombuchas or first aid kits too. You're going to play the run and shoot game quite a bit. This is going to take a minute. Once it's defeated, Alessa is restored as the Incubator and hands a baby to Harry. This scene is very laden with trappings of divinity. Like the position that they're in, she is made to look like a saint here, delivering a baby, which is a very biblical scene. And the music is like swelling of keyboard organ-ish sound patches, and it's just swelling over and over again in these very consonant harmonies. So this is being painted as this being some sort of a divine, like perhaps a divine birth or something. This baby is a main character, I think, in Silent Hill 3, Heather Mason. We don't learn that here. That we just know that this is a baby.
Yeah, you're correct.
But while this is happening, there's a little portal to get out of here, and Harry, the baby, and Sybil run to leave. And like you said, Lisa drags Kaufman down to hell. This is the good plus ending. We get the credits here. We do the credits. Harry and Sybil leave with the baby, and we get this very bizarre post-credits scene that like goes through each character like they're behind the scenes on a movie set, which is very weird.
Yeah, and everyone's doing like B-roll, like we fucked up our lines, let's laugh, ha ha ha.
Yeah, like Dahlia like gets in close to the camera and pretends to kiss it. I was like,
Yes.
What is this?
Cheryl, it's like a little kid just sticks her tongue out at the camera. It's very fucking. I don't know if they were thinking like, wow, that was a super dark ending. We need to have like some levity or something like this. It's so out of left field. And again, I think, to be honest with you, for me, it just adds to the unsettling nature of this game. Is that even by the end, the protagonists and main characters were acting so counter to anyone in a horrifying situation, which by the end of most cinema and movies, the survivors are left, the cops have shown up, the ambulance has shown up, we're getting, put into the ambulance, everyone's sad, but they're all exhausted, except now they're doing fucking B-roll. It's very bizarre, but it just adds to the unsettling nature. Yeah, exactly. Baphomet appears, or it's a heavily implied Baphomet. You shoot Baphomet out of the air. Again, a name you don't hear too much without digging into religious esoterica.
And too, Baphomet is often incorrectly conflated with the devil, with Satan, as Christianity likes to posit him. So it's fitting that they chose to use this.
Exactly. Alessa and Cheryl recombined. They give the baby. The thing is, Silent Hill 1 and Silent Hill 3 are directly related. Silent Hill 2 is an outlier, but I'll talk a little bit about that before we end. So the baby will eventually be named Heather, and we will meet her again in Silent Hill 3. She will be Heather Mason, the protagonist of that game. But again, essentially what they're doing is some combination of the birth of Venus and the Pieta, I think it is, or something like that. It's basically, Mary weeping over Christ after his crucifixion in her lap, some kind of like divine baby giving up or sacrificing a life to give a life. Harry and Sybil run out of town, don't go to a car, they run out of town with the baby and essentially recreate the same scene in the opening role of the game that Harry and his original wife did when they found Cheryl, except now Sybil and Harry are doing it with Heather.
Yes, and it should be noted, there is debate as to which ending is canonical. The consensus that I've found is that the standard good ending, not the good plus that we just described, the standard good ending is canonical, where Sybil actually dies, but Harry still takes Heather from this place. That's, from what I've seen, that's considered canon. I have seen that even the people that worked on this game have differing opinions on this. Which I think adds to that ambiguity of it too. Like, just like with that post-credits B-roll scene, you're never quite sure what is real. And, if before this turned into a big series, what I would say is it doesn't matter what's real. That's so far that's not even a discussion that matters. Sorry, I feel like I could have worded that better, but I think you know what I mean.
I do.
Another thing that adds to this is if you get the bad ending, which is, bad plus sounds like it would be worse, like a larger negative number is smaller. No, the bad ending is the worst. What happens here, that
the
happens
bad minus
if you
ending is the worst.
There you go. Kaufman, if you don't do that quest and you kill Sybil, what ends up happening is it's revealed that this was all a hallucination from the DMT that Harry was getting as he was dying, because he crashed his car and he's actually he's imagining all of this as he's passing away.
Yeah.
That's the bad ending.
That's the truly bad ending. It literally flashes to him now dead in the crashed car.
Which I mean, a lot of people don't like that trope, like he was dead the whole time.
But there's
It's
a reason
fine.
it's a
I don't
trope.
mind
It
it.
gets used. Yeah, there's a reason it gets used.
Yeah. There's a joke ending, which is, from what I understand, is prevalent in all of the Silent Hill games. I don't remember how you get this, but it involves Harry getting abducted by aliens.
Yes. There is this Silent Hill has a new game plus mode. And when you open it up, you're going to receive 2 items. I forget what the other one is, but the first one to get this alternate ending is a mysterious gemstone that basically says, if used in the right place, what could happen? Question mark, question mark, question mark. And what you're supposed to do is every time you go to a place where there's the seal of Samael, if you look around, you might get a cutscene that suddenly Harry looks at the sky and he sees some kind of object moving against the stars. When you reach the lighthouse, if you use this item, that object reveals itself to be a horde of alien spaceships, as in aliens from the 1950s. They land, and you get a cutscene where the alien's getting out and they're chattering in whatever language of theirs, and Harry's like, oh, okay, guys, okay. Have you seen a little girl, maybe about 7, begins giving Cheryl's description? They shoot him in the guts with a laser, and they drag him off onto a ship, and the ships fly away, and the game literally will end right there.
I kind of love when devs do that. Like they clearly made a serious game here. Like they weren't messing around. And then they just added this in just for shits and giggles. Like they had time, so they were like, yeah, why not?
Absolutely. Because the final cutscene is not like an in-game graphic. It's basically poster cut comic book pages. Like somebody drew it well after and just photo scanned it onto the disc.
Right. That's true. It's not in-engine. It's so goofy. I wish more games would do this. My understanding is that there's a dog joke ending in Silent Hill 2, I think.
Yeah, there's a Shiba Inu that's actually running the show, and James runs up on it and he gives the dog like a big hug, like, "Oh, you silly boy, you were torturing my own psyche. Oh, good boy, what a goof."
That's too cool. That's too funny.
And I think there's actually also an alien ending in Silent Hill 2 as well. But with all this, Silent Hill 1, like I said, in its base game is so unnerving, and by the end goes so goddamn ham on the unsettling, the mixing of essentially a demon worship cult and a drug cult. So basically, if the Manson family had actually succeeded, oh, and by the way, the devil is real, I think we would have had something very similar here. And, I love it. It's not necessarily the greatest piece of fiction ever. It's goofy as fuck, but it's absolutely, you need to play it. One of the things that pisses me off, though, is that, as we said, Heather, the infant that they pick up in Silent Hill 1, is the protagonist of Silent Hill 3, which, as you said, I think ruins the ambiguity of the endings. Having a direct sequel means that, yes, one of them is now canon, and obviously if they got the baby out, and we're playing her now as she's 17, we know which one was the right one. I think it would have been better had they truly left it as, we don't know, except for the UFO ending, we truly don't know which of these was the right one. That ambiguity would have been better left. But when you have direct sequels like that, that's what happens, I guess.
Yeah, it loses something. It loses some of the effect that the ambiguity that they intended to be there, it loses some of that potency. And that
wasn't Team Silent's fault. I know that was a Konami directive. Like, hey, these 2 were really popular. We need a third one. Fucking do something.
Yeah. I haven't finished Silent Hill 2 yet, so I don't know. Like, were they told to make a sequel to number 1, or was that their decision?
Yeah, I don't know, but it's. I get the idea, especially with 3, and I actually did. Although I've thrown Silent Hill 2 under the bus, I actually did play 3 a little bit. I gave it about a half an hour before I ripped the disc back out of the drive and returned it to GameStop. I actually hated that so much I actually returned it. And like I said, I personally have never been back to the series since. So this is one of the reasons that Silent Hill 1 stands as such a towering piece of survival horror gameplay for me, because my distaste for the series after that had become so visceral that I really couldn't do. And to be honest with you, from 4 on through the American-made versions of anything like Downpour, a couple of the other ones, they really I got the idea that the series only got worse, and that had PT actually been made, it really would have brought Silent Hill back to its roots and been possibly one of the greatest pieces of psychological horror ever made. But again, this is, we could shit in one hand, wish in the other, see which fills up first.
Yeah, the consensus that I've seen is that after Silent Hill 3, the series just goes downhill. They're chasing that dragon of the high of the first 3, and they just never can replicate that.
Yeah, what I've seen of The Room and the screenshots, little videos, it wouldn't have been, I'm not saying it's horrible, but it wouldn't have been something I picked up. And anything after that was American-made, the Konami farmed out. And those games were trying to chase Silent Hill 2 so hard, they were tripping over their own feet. I'm pretty sure Downpour was somebody American thinking, let's remake Silent Hill 2, but with a prisoner.
Jeez, that's unfortunate. I would like to go through this series. I had a pretty good time with 1. I think I liked talking about it more than I liked playing it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do really like it. I'm not always the biggest fan of cult stuff, but I think this worked out to be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
2, I'm having a good time with so far. I don't know where it's going, but having fun. I have my own thoughts. And 3, I don't remember. Is that on PS2 as well?
It was on PS2.
Okay. Well, I haven't looked it up, so hopefully it's not as expensive as 2 or 1. Because I would love to play it on original hardware if I can. So I'm looking forward to going through the series, at least until it gets to the point where, like you experienced, I just can't do it anymore.
And here's the part where when I talk about horror games, I feel compelled to preface this, because horror is as a genre, incredibly subjective. What horrifies one person may not affect somebody else. We all have a baseline of what we feel is horrific as human beings. Simple things: fear of the dark, fear of pain, as I said, fear of blood, fear of what may happen to someone or something we care deeply about when we're not able to protect them. But after that, it becomes kind of, what do we do? What actually scares us? What is our trauma? Fear of insects. Some people work with insects their entire lives, and no matter how gross a maggot may be, they find it's not that bothersome because it has a place in the ecosystem. So for what scares one person may not scare another. Fear of the dead. Morticians exist for a reason. You spend enough time around dead bodies, you realize just the process of the end of life, how it works. There's no mystery. It's not frightening. And sure as shit that they're not going to get up and walk away or try to eat you. Fear of implements that might cause pain. Works for some, not for others. A combat medic who's been through Afghanistan is going to look at the horror of the body very differently from someone who just watched a couple of Friday the 13th movies and had a different reaction. Horror is incredibly subjective, and what horrifies you is not going to horrify someone else. And we get presented to us in its various flavors and forms and ways. And the more I play horror games, I'm used to a lot of the tropes. I will get startled. I don't get scared. But it's the ones that stick with me more that have a huge atmosphere. Atmosphere counts for a lot. And that's what I think Silent Hill, the first one, really plays on. The concept of atmosphere, being disoriented, and not really 100% being sure what the next step is going to be. And even when you find out, this doesn't make 100% sense. And it's not asking the character, it's asking the player. Does this make sense? How are you going to handle this? What are your thoughts going forward? So that's why it really sort of reaches into a bit of the psychology. Silent Hill 1 is more of a straight-up religious cult horror movie. Religious horror cult game is what I'm trying to say. Its sequels are all over the board. They do different things. But I think this is why Silent Hill 1 stands as such a defining moment for me, is it really got the atmosphere right. Even if the story gets bananas, they got the atmosphere right, and that counts for a lot.
Here, here. I couldn't agree more. Atmosphere is the one thing that well, let me rephrase that. Atmosphere, I think, is unequivocally done very well here. I can, you might not like the music, you might not like the voice acting, the mechanics, whatever. The atmosphere, they created something that really, it brought psychological horror in a big way to video games, and it wouldn't have happened without Silent Hill 1. Sure, you can argue that maybe 2 did it better. If you think so, you might argue that another series did it better. Amnesia, Sure, okay, but they wouldn't have existed, maybe, probably, without Silent Hill 1. And I think, I'm not one. I don't often make legacy arguments like that, but I think it's worth noting at the very least. Like they accomplished something really great here. I'm really glad that we did this. I'm really glad that we went through this game instead of Dino Crisis. I think this turned out to be a better episode, and I really like this game. I'm looking forward to seeing more. That does it. We did it. We got through it. So, now that we have, I want to say thank you, Phil, for joining me. And especially because you're a new guest on the show, I want you to tell the listeners a little bit about Deleted Saves and what it is you are up to, and maybe recommend them a first-time episode.
Absolutely. Well, Deleted Saves can be found wherever you find 5 podcasts of your choice. I'm in the community. You may have seen me cross over on other shows. Rick here and Pixel Project Radio is definitely one of them, and I'm glad to be here. Yeah, I'm on any major podcast. If you want to find me online, if you haven't found my show, you can come to Twitter/X, because as I say everywhere, fuck Elon Musk. It's still Twitter to me. And you can find me at Deleted Saves. You can come to tell me how wrong I am about my opinion of Silent Hill 2, and I will probably laugh and go on with my day. But I will thank you for your interaction and time. I have my own Discord channel here for Deleted Saves. I'm on Instagram for Deleted Saves Podcast. If you liked it so much, I have a Patreon. It is Deleted Saves Podcast. I'm extremely cheap, like $1 helps head towards the show. It's not necessary, but I greatly appreciate it. And believe me, my patrons are a small but dedicated group, and I'm sure they would love to have other people to commiserate about. If I were to give you guys a basic premise of the show, I try to give my thoughts on a game that has stuck out to me in some way or another, good, bad, or the ugly. Within 5 to 20 minutes, sometimes I get up to 30 if I'm feeling really spicy and talkative. But I try to be considerate of your time. It is a just me sort of thing. I get there, I talk, I make bad jokes, and I give my thoughts. Some of them I shoot from the hip, some are a little more analytical. Depends on how I'm feeling that day, it depends on the game. If I were to give someone a first-timer's listen to my show, I would recommend a few. For some reason, I have not yet understood, people absolutely love my take on Tenchu Stealth Assassins and Enderall Forgotten Stories, the Skyrim mod. Those have been my most listened to episodes. I don't know what I did on those ones, but people love them. If I were to recommend a couple more throughout my catalog, if those don't jingle your pants pockets, I would definitely always recommend my Alan Wake episode, talking about Alan Wake, the first game. You can also find my thoughts on Alan Wake 2. My thoughts on the entirety of the Dead Space series, 1, 2, and 3. My thoughts on games like Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy IX, which are some of my favorites in the series, so I always give them glowing reviews. And even earlier to my days on the NES. Occasionally I have had guest episodes which were really, really good. When I couldn't step up to the plate, I have had a few people drop in and help me out, so those have been really fun. But yeah, those named would be some of my great starter episodes to really kind of give you an idea of where I'm at and what I'm doing. And of course, I would appreciate a listen, a follow, or at least a little bit of your time. And that's what I'm always thankful for.
Absolutely. I will echo that. Please do check out Deleted Saves. It is worth your time, and, bonus, it's not a large time commitment. You can find links to Phil's show and all of Phil's stuff in the episode description. You can find it there. You could also find the sources that I consulted for this episode, which for Silent Hill, admittedly, not too many. And you can find links to our stuff as well, to the Pixel Project Radio Discord, to the Patreon page. That's patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. That's not free. The Discord is free. You could join. Anybody can join and hang out. Please do. I'd love to hear from you. You can also give us a rating or a review if you're so kind. You can do that on any podcasting platform that allows you to, and it would certainly mean a lot to me because it helps get the show into rotation. So, with all of that being said, once again, Phil, thank you so much for joining me. You can hear more deleted saves by going to the links in the episode description. You could hang out with us on social media, Deleted Saves, and Pixel Project Radio on various social medias. You can find all that in the description. And finally, thank you to the listeners for sticking around so long. This was a longer one, and we appreciate your time. So, with all that said, I'm Rick, as always. I'm your host. Thank you for sticking around. Until we see you again, we're signing off for now. Take care.